Most HYROX athletes are probably training for the wrong race. They think HYROX is simply just a fitness competition. So they train harder, they add more intensity, and they push every single session. And then they wonder why they completely fall apart halfway through the race. And I would put forth the idea that it's because HYROX is not won by the athlete who can suffer the most. It's won by the athlete who can navigate the control of fatigue, pace the runs, manage transitions, execute the stations, fuel correctly, and most importantly, make good decisions when their body is screaming at them to stop. And this is exactly where most athletes lose massive amounts of time. They overcook the first K, they redline on the ski erg, they try to muscle through the sleds, and they spike their heart rate during the burpees. And by station 5, they're not racing anymore, they're simply surviving. And the worst part, I think, is that most of them think the answer is to simply train harder. And I actually don't think it is. And so today, it's not just me. I'm joined by Mike and Maria. They are world level HYROX athletes and coaches who've helped hundreds of athletes reach their peak potential. They understand this race from the inside and out, both as competitors and coaches, and they own and operate Holistic Athlete Fitness Consulting. Of course, I'm here as usual. I've coached over 150 Boston qualifiers, marathoners to 209 to 6 hours, and I also help both Mike and Maria with their run coaching. A lot of athletes training correctly for HYROX, they think it's just a strength event or it's just a running event. And we firmly believe, the three of us, that it's very different than both of those. Over the rest of this video, we're gonna break down the complete HYROX system, how to pace your runs, how to attack every station, how to train under fatigue, how to fuel properly, how to stop blowing up halfway through, how to structure your training, and how to stay mentally sharp even when the race gets ugly. And so we're gonna try to give you the entire picture of how to help you chase big goals, develop in a sustainable way, and maximize your performance. So if you wanna stop surviving HYROX and rather start thriving and performing and actually learn how to race, watch this video all the way through. Mike and Maria, thanks for joining me. I'll let you guys give a much better intro than I just did to get people to watch this video. So how about Maria, you start us off?
Sounds good. So, hey, everybody, my name is Mike Fecik. As Brant mentioned, I'm a co-founder and head coach at Holistic Athlete. My background is extremely diverse. I did my undergrad in kinesiology, followed up with an MBA. So owning a coaching business, perfect fit for my background. From an endurance perspective, I've done everything from triathlon, ultra marathons. The last 2 years, I've competed at the elite level in HYROX and solo as well as doubles, and have luckily been good enough to go to Worlds every year that I've competed. And I'm super excited to be here and share our knowledge with everybody.
Yeah, and I'm Mike Fecik, the other co-founder of Holistic Athlete, and got my career started a long time ago. I've been coaching for over 20 years and started with triathlon, kind of helped write concurrent training programs for athletes, which is known as hybrid training. So marrying together, endurance sports with strength work and kind of putting it all together. Switched to long distance running up to 100K, and then found HYROX, competed pretty much in everything that I'm allowed to compete in with HYROX, gone to Worlds for the past 5 years, and just been coaching for a really long time.
Yeah, this is perfect. And this is why I wanted you two on here. And we work well together. We'll probably, share on some of those things that we do together throughout the video and such. But I think both of your guys' experience in this new and emerging sport is really going to be crucial for people to learn. I think a lot of videos don't have the depth on both sides in terms of everything you guys have done on the HYROX side and the endurance side coming together. And so with that, I want to posit a first question here. And I think I talk about it as the HYROX problem. And I think it's what most athletes get wrong. And so, lending from both of your guys' backgrounds, I think one of the things that we see all the time, and I imagine now kind of as HYROX has gone like this and CrossFit has gone like this, is the CrossFitter problem. And so can you guys walk through kind of what that transition's like for people in the way that people have approached CrossFit and are now coming over to HYROX?
I think specifically, a lot of the time when you look at a CrossFit athlete, obviously being strong, super important component of that. They do a lot of anaerobic high intensity work, and actually learning to pace yourself and endurance work is something new. So I found even CrossFit athletes that have come to know our in-person classes, for example, trying to get them to run with a lower heart rate is something super challenging. Getting them to learn what pace feels like and actually take a more endurance lens to training is completely new for them. So I find like being able to crush the stations is great, but in HYROX we only need to be strong to a certain point. We need to obviously be able to push and pull the sled effectively. Obviously we need to be able to carry the lunch bag as well and the kettlebells and all those pieces, but it's to a point. We don't want to be necessarily like the strongest person in the room, but we need to have a really strong aerobic base, which comes from low intensity aerobic work. And I find that's like the key component that's missing in a lot of like CrossFit athletes is that time that they've developed a really strong aerobic system to be able to sustain the proper pacing and be able to, not just survive the back half of the race, but thrive in it, like you talked about.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that with CrossFit, there's a lot of really great CrossFit athletes making the switch over. The ones that are thriving are the ones that are being patient and actually putting in the work to understand how to develop that aerobic engine a lot more. They're doing that and not just working on the high end strength work that CrossFit typically, does work on. This isn't a 3-minute or 20-minute, AMRAP. This is a 1 hour plus race. And those athletes really need to, think more about like the long term versus just like short, fast efforts. And there's a ton of carryover and there's a ton of new stuff that they just need to like kind of work on that they don't necessarily do in CrossFit. I think they're completely different sports, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the interesting things, like if I take the track and field lens to this, there's a method in throws, and it's called the Bondarchuk method. And so Dylan Armstrong, Canadian, multiple of the throwers now follow the Bondarchuk method. And in short, without breaking it down fully, he created a system where he knew that you only needed a certain amount of strength in certain lifts to be able to throw certain distances. And so anything above that was actually detrimental to performance. And so I think that's a really cool lens to look at HYROX through this like CrossFitter, like coming over lens, or even a strength athlete coming over is, yes, it's important. Like I would suck at HYROX right now because I don't have a lot of the strength, but it's only so much because, as we'll talk about later in the video, it's a much smaller proportion of the total work time than you think it is. Is that fair?
For sure. I think that that's very fair. And I have a lot of clients that are like, oh, my strength numbers aren't, as much as they were when I was doing CrossFit. And I say, that's okay. We don't need that. We need you to be able to handle the weights. And obviously you still need to be somewhat strong, especially as you go up through the levels. But yeah, I do think that it's strength to a point. It's almost like, for instance, people used to joke with triathlon, you didn't have to be the fastest swimmer or biker or runner. You just needed to be able to put it all together. And it's the same thing here. You're kind of a jack of all trades. You're not really good at one thing. You're an okay runner. And again, I use that term loosely because some of these elites are running very, very fast and they're still able to lift and, do some really strong stuff. But you don't have to be, a world Olympic runner and also be able to do powerlifting at a, high level either.
Absolutely. What do you think, Maria?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think like just reemphasizing like you need to be strong to a point. You need to have movement efficiency. I think is important. Big aerobic base, and I think like Mike said, I think that was actually a really great analogy. Like being able to put it all together. And you see a lot of times people online posting like, their really fast run times at the track, and it's like, okay, now you got to prove it in a race. It's not a pure running race. It's like, how does it all come together? How can you pace yourself? And we'll obviously get into that later in this discussion. But I think it's being able to master everything all together for that hour.
Yeah, it's probably a good place to jump off to the other side of the poll, which is runners or endurance athletes coming who can run really, really fast. But exactly like you said, they have none of the strength reserve or the strength capacity to get even past like sled push or sled pull, right? Let alone like lunges. I think most runners would probably die on because we don't have the range of motion. But I think this is why this conversation has been so interesting to me and why I wanted to do this with you guys, because I think there's so many entry points to HYROX. It's not like track or triathlon or even CrossFit was. There's so many entry points, and I'm toying with this idea. So I'll kind of test it here with you guys, where people argue about training, based on vibes rather than like science and experience. And so like you get like vibe arguments for training where it's like, yeah, but like I just feel like I should train this way. It's like, okay, maybe, but like I don't really care about your feelings sometimes. I really want to see how you should train. So what do you guys think of that argument? You guys see far more HYROX athletes than I do.
I mean, Brant, you and I both have been coaching for a really long time,
Yeah.
so we probably see a lot more of the trends, and everything. It's really crazy. Like it was before, oh yeah, let's just do a lot of endurance and run and run
Yeah.
and run, because I just want to be a marathoner, or the thing to do right now is triathlon or Ironman or whatever it is. And then it switched to CrossFit, and then it switched to HYROX, and then tomorrow it's going to be something completely new. And there's always going to be something new. And I really think it's sticking to the basics of what we kind of all have learned to do, to really make it what it needs to be. So at the end of the day, it's push and pull movements and learning how to run really well in zone 2. That's all it is. You don't need to be going and doing, HYROX every single workout or anything. And I know we're going to get into a lot more of that as well as we go along here, but like I think it's doing the boring stuff and doing the boring stuff really, really well. I know basketball players are really good at this. I'm sure, I think it's Michael Jordan that like would get to practice like 3 hours beforehand and just sit there and do the same shot from the same spot for hours until it was absolutely perfect every single time. And, there's a lot of sports where they do the exact same thing. It's just that same movement over and over. It's that repetitive movement. It's the same thing here. It's learning the basics and then really getting very, very good at those before you actually do the fun stuff, which is just sprinkled right on top.
Yeah, I think people overcomplicate training a lot. And I think a big issue with that is probably influence from social media. You see this person's workout online and then, you end up wanting to do it or incorporate it, or you see people are doing X amount of running every week, or you see people are doing X amount of HYROX sims and all that stuff like that. And I think people can get easily influenced that they see like, oh, it's working for this person, it must work for me. I think people just like muddy what training really is, and it is like mastering the basics, becoming a really good runner. And to become a really good runner, it's a lot of really boring running. Well, boring, right? Like easy work. It's not this sexy like I'm at the track and I can show you my 1Ks where I'm running 3:30s and I'm taking my 2 minutes of rest in between. That's like one workout out of like how many ever you do in a week, 15 or depending on your training, right? And I don't want to put that into everyone's heads. You need to do 15 workouts a week. Don't take that away. But I'm saying it's such a small percentage and people forget that it really is very simple. And I think as coaches, I feel like I saw this quote one time that was really good. It's like, we're not here to entertain you, as in like trying to make your workouts exciting all the time. We're trying to make you better and better in what domain you're interested in getting better at. And a lot of the time it is that like easy, boring work. Oh, look, another 60-minute easy run. Like you give me 90-minute bikes 95 times a week. Like it's like, okay, yeah, is it the most exciting thing? No. And I do it on a C2, but I need the improvements, right? And those are the gains I'm trying to get. So it's just doing the work over and over and over and over again, no matter how boring it is.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, the other thing that people see is the elites coming up and they just see what they're doing right now, but they don't get the whole backstory. They've been consistently doing stuff. Alex Ranchovic, for instance, he was a really high level swimmer. He wasn't a runner, he wasn't anything, but the consistency of swimming over time is what built out that aerobic engine for him. Even for like someone like Maria, she has this triathlon background. She's done some CrossFit. She's done really long distance running for years and years. So this aerobic base that she's built out doing all these boring things over and over again is what makes her this really good athlete at HYROX.
I think to add to it, the way you need to look at training and the way I think good coaches look at training, and I think you guys will agree with this, but tell me if you don't, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is I don't think your first event is ever going to be your best one, whether it's a marathon, a triathlon, a HYROX, or whatever it is. And so you have to program in a way, and as an athlete, sustain training in a way that's sustainable for a time period that's measured in years and not months, because for you to actually get to the level that you want to be at, it's going to be measured in months and years and not weeks or days. And I think too many athletes who don't have that base, like the athletes you mentioned, come in and try to copycat elite athletes. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video, where we can actually talk about what like good training looks like, not just the clickbaity, like do this one workout to increase your row or do this one workout to increase your runs, where it's like, I think we share this philosophy around training that every single element that you do is connected. So your run pace after your row are going to depend on how you rode and how hard you went. And your technique is going to depend on some of your ancillary work. And all of it's going to depend on your aerobic base. And then your aerobic base actually depends on how you go about training. And so I would argue that there's nothing in HYROX that's isolated to like a singular workout or a singular style or a single prescriptive type piece or week, but rather that it's a bunch of elements that are connected and underpinned by the aerobic base. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. And I think the problem that we see, like kind of alluding to what Mike said online, is like you see a lot of people that come in like their first or second race, run amazing times, and then people want those results that quickly as well, without looking at like the strategic long-term impact. You come into, a fitness race or like a type of training with a certain background. And that's just what your background is. If you don't have a big aerobic base, you haven't had years of running, then you have to take the time and spend the time to do that. But I think too, with like we see with social media and like all these quick times and people coming in and running, some people are naturally very talented and, can build very quickly, have the resources to, etc. But I think there's too much comparison going on and thinking like, I need to improve that quickly every race versus looking at it from like a strategic long term. Like if you come without a strong aerobic base, that takes years and years to build. You can't expect to do that in one HYROX season. Will it get better? Yes. Will you get some gains being newer to like aerobic work? For sure. But then at one point, like the gains get smaller and then it becomes, harder and harder to make them. And so I think like people come in with this like false interpretation that like I'm going to PB every race. I'm going to be able to be, at the elite 15 level within a year, but yet you've never ran more than a 5K race before. So it's just like, I think people not realizing the like long-term commitment to building the aerobic base that it takes to get to those levels.
I have to agree with that, especially the PBing every race thing. Like that's not how it works. Even at the elite level, you'll see, and these guys are racing, guys and girls are racing every weekend, every 2 weekends, every 3 weekends, whatever it is. So they're racing a significant amount. Not every race is a PB. So you can't go in expecting every race to be a PB, and you have to look at it as a year over year thing. And you can't even go course to course. I mean, I know it's inside, but nothing is ever completely 100% the same year to year. It's not even the same venue. It might be different conditions. Just like outside, you have weather conditions that change things, and that is going to affect the race. It's the same thing with inside. It's, you had to go to the ski erg that's the third one instead of the first one. Those kinds of things affect those times. So I think that these people that are looking at them and saying, the world record was just broken, but you know what? I lift as much as she does and I can run as fast as she does, so I should be able to do this. It's just not like, it's putting it all together, and it's the consistency that these people have, but they're also looking at it as a long-term thing versus saying, okay, next weekend I have to beat last weekend's race time. Never going to happen. And that's just, you're setting yourself up for failure and aggravation at every single race if you do that.
Totally. I actually call that the Amazon problem. Like before Amazon, we're like, oh yeah, like I'll buy that. I'll wait a week or 2 weeks for it to come in. And now like if Prime doesn't show up the next day, you're like, I want this now. Like I ordered it now, right? And I think athletes are very much the same way nowadays. That's why I call it the Amazon problem. It's like, I want a PR now. I want to qualify for Worlds now. I want to do this now. And if it doesn't happen, we get frustrated, but we don't, especially for newer athletes who haven't looked at the history of endurance sport and watched how it's developed. And I'll add HYROX as an extension of endurance sport for this conversation. I think it's really hard to see that this is a long-term project.
Just on that point alone, endurance sports people usually get this a little bit more than strength sports people, because endurance sports, you can't run a half marathon and then come back expecting the exact same result the next weekend or even the next month. Same thing with triathlon. So they get that you're not going to PR every single race, and they don't want those immediate results. They understand that it takes a lot longer for that to happen. Whereas with a PR, maybe you were just off that day, you eat a couple extra carbs, and then all of a sudden the next week you have an extra 5 pounds on the bar and get a PR. You know what I mean? So it's this, like, I think endurance sports kind of understand that it's more of a longevity play versus some of these other sports where you're just PRing every week. And when you're brand new to a sport, it's super easy to PR. Yeah, you're probably going to PR, from race 1 to race 2 with a couple little modifications. But as you go further into the sport, when you're 2 or 3 years in, same thing. And qualifying for worlds, coming from, again, an endurance background, going to like Ironman worlds or 70.3 worlds, you never did that every year. It was an honor to get to that level. And when HYROX started, they were just handing out world spots, literally handing them out to anybody. I remember our first race, we went and we did well. We got third in our age group, and they were like, here's a world spot. And we're like, okay. We showed up thinking like,
We're like, what's worlds?
Yeah, what's worlds? Cool. We'll go to Vegas, whatever.
Yeah.
But you show up and you're like, there's some really fit people here. And then you realize that like they were just handing out these spots to everybody. And now all those people that were getting spots are now expecting spots all the time. And it's like, that's not how this works. You literally have to be the best of the best at this point to get to that spot. And eventually you're not going to go every year. That's just not how it works.
1,000%. And I think it's a curse. Like I talk about this in my book. Like one of the reasons that I like kind of got screwed mentally and kind of retired, so to speak, is I made worlds in the 70.3. Like still, it was still hard to make worlds, but I made it in my debut. And then it was like, well, what if I can't make it again? Like, it set me up for failure doing that. Like I'm a pretty good athlete. I'm not great by any stretch, but like I made it in my first go thinking like, oh, I'll never make it to worlds or anything. And then you make it and you go, well, anything less than that is a failure. And so it plays both ways, right? Like people expecting it. And then those of you who came in early and got it, it's now like anything but that qualification is a failure. And both sides of that, I would say, are completely wrong because it's looking at it from a purely outcome focused perspective versus looking at when we open up endurance sport broadly, it's a repetition of processes over and over and over again. And so we have to focus on getting better. And I think part of the problem with HYROX now too, like you both mentioned, is like the numbers are skyrocketing. I read something the other day that's like they do no marketing and it's one of the fastest growing sports ever. So it's like you could be like 3 minutes better than you were last year when you qualified for Worlds and still not go. Because it's nuts, right? And so I think it's really interesting. It's a fascinating phenomenon to watch as a semi-outsider here.
Highlighting what you both kind of said as Mike was talking about, like people that are in endurance sports have more of an understanding that it's like not a guarantee every year. And I think that's something you and I have talked about too, Brian, in my own training is like being more process focused versus like outcome focused, because outcome focus really you skip over the importance of the process and those day-to-day, did you show up every day, what's the checklist from the day versus like you said, pass or fail if I make it to Worlds or not, versus like am I getting better, and focusing on that piece versus being so outcome driven, because it's easy to be outcome driven in today's society too with Instagram and exposure to results and stuff, so then that becomes a very primary focus. So I think like that's an important reminder for a lot of people. You'll have a lot more success and a lot more satisfaction in what you do if you actually, and this sounds like every quote you hear, but like if you actually enjoy the process and actually enjoy training, then the outcome is kind of like the cherry on top if you get the outcome you're looking for.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. Like the best training I've ever done, and I would say that the past 3 months has been probably part of that, falling in love with the training itself and just giving in to just doing the training and enjoying the training. And then whatever the outcome is, it's going to be, but you honestly have better training because of it. Like numbers have just gotten better because it's just do the training, enjoy it, move on with your day. And the more you can fall in love with that training, the better it becomes. And the more you actually enjoy when those successes actually happen, I think too.
Yeah, and I can tell you guys all that Mike is speaking the truth because he's biking a lot and has probably had like 8 flats where I see his bikes are destroyed and he's still loving it and doing it. So he walks the walk and talks the talk too. So, okay, I think that overarching philosophy was fantastic, and hopefully people are still watching because that would be fantastic, because we're actually going to go and see, just like on time with the bell, we're going to actually go and dive in to kind of the race anatomy deep dive here. That was like perfect. I love that segue. We'll keep that in there. So
yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Whoever it is. That was Amazon, wasn't it? I bet you that's what it was. So, yeah. Okay. So, I'm going to get you two, as the experts here, to walk through the full structure of HYROX. So, if there's beginners listening, they know it. If there's, intermediates or even elites listening, like, let's actually walk through it, look through it, set the tone appropriately for how this actually goes down from a race perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with like the first station. So obviously before you start a HYROX race, we always start with a 1 kilometer run, or however long the run distance is. Sometimes it's a little longer, sometimes it's a little shorter, depending on how the race is set up. So once you're in that Red Bull start tunnel, your go time kicks off. They give you a bit of a countdown, and then you hit the corresponding amount of laps. Always going in the in arch, out the out arch. Very important that you make sure you do that properly. There's people that have done it incorrectly. You get a penalty for a lot of things if you're not following the proper structure of HYROX. So we're going to come into the ski erg, so station number 1. Always make sure you also know the order of the stations. I've had clients that are vets at this and can still mess up the order. For me, it's like clockwork. I always think about what's coming next. So if I run into ski, I'm like, sled push is next. So then in my head, I know I'm already going to sled push. Also, before I get into ski erg, make sure you come in and look at the layout in person. We obviously get the course map and can get a sense of where everything is. It just looks very different in person, especially when you add in all the blow up arches, all the people, etc. Can be pretty overwhelming. So when you ahead of your race, make sure you come in and look at where all the stations are set up. Sometimes they put them in order, sometimes they don't. So again, always make sure you know where you're going. So station 1, we have the 1,000-meter ski erg. This is very much the first station. You're not going to win, but you could lose it on here. Like we talked about, some rookie mistakes are, jacking up your heart rate. I've seen people sprint this. You see them come in, sprint the first run, come in first on the ski erg. You see them hammering the ski erg, and then, past sled push, I never see them again because they exerted way too much energy on the first 2 stations, which again speaks to the importance of the fact that this is an endurance race. And I always tell my clients, you never start a half marathon at 5K pace. You just wouldn't. And the same applies here. And I think where people forget is like, because it's 8 by 1K and you're like, oh, 1K, not too bad. But it's just the amount of effort over time that's really important for you to remember. It's still an endurance race. There is about 8.7 kilometers of running, so make sure you do remember that and pace appropriately. So 1,000-meter ski erg, first in, first out principle. Dampers usually set at a 6. You can move the damper as much as you want. I recommend moving it once before you start pulling, and you need to pull with both arms, and pretty much it. You have to wait till 1,000 meters is up, and then you head out and look for that out arch. And then I'll pass it to Mike for station 2.
Yeah, station 2 is sled push. One thing to add for the ergs, especially ski and row, is you have a computer right in front of you telling you what your pace is. So it's very, very easy to be able to know what pace you should be skiing at for these 2 stations and stick to that pace versus just going off of like, I'm just going to go all out. Like, it's so much easier because you have the information right in front of you. So if you do testing on the ergs, you should know what your pace is for a 2K or a 5K, and you can actually figure that out for what it should be for your racing. Sled push, you're coming in the in arch, going again first in, first out principle here. So you're running down. A judge will tell you which one to go to. Don't just pick whatever lane you want to go to. And it is always the same. It's always 12.5 meters down, 12.5 meters back, 12.5 meters down, and 12.5 meters back. Sometimes judges get lost. They're looking at other people and they think, okay, you're done and you've only done 2 lengths. Make sure you say to that judge, no, I still have 2 more, and do 2 more. And on the other side, a judge might say, okay, you still have a down and back to do of your 50 meters. And you can say, no, I'm done. I just did 50 meters, and then you can run out. The other thing is when you stop, you have to stay in your lane for this. You can't just walk wherever you want to, impede anybody else's progress. And it has to be a forward motion with the push.
And I think an important part for this one too, for both sleds, when we get into sled pull next, is movement efficiency. HYROX over the years has changed what you're pushing the sled and pulling the sled on. They now use center turf. Sometimes difficulty can vary based on, what lane you're in. And unfortunately, you just have to take what's given to you race day. We can't control that. So when you get in, you want to make sure you have a low body angle. Chest is about parallel to ground. You want to think about pushing through the sled. A lot of the time, especially when it's an open sled where the weight's a bit lighter, you kind of see people picking up the back end and driving the sled into the ground, which is what we don't want. Obviously creating more friction and making it more difficult on yourself. And then another important thing too, you'll probably see some of the elites or very mature athletes being able to go unbroken on a length, but they know that they can handle it. Their aerobic system can handle it. It's not going to completely spike their heart rate, etc. They're going to be able to run off of it, and it is practiced. So I always recommend for my clients to break up the lengths. Even if you feel like you can go unbroken, it's the same thing I feel like, Brant, when you're running a marathon. The first 5K feels great, but that's why we're not going to push it, because you still got the back half of the race coming up. Same thing with the sled push too, making sure that you break it up effectively. And that's the opportunity in training to practice your strategy and technique to see how well you run off of it. I've done races where I'll push unbroken for 2 lengths and then break up the back half because I want to give my legs a bit of a rest. And then, to be honest, sometimes you can be way more effective and faster at it if you take a quick break, because you're not gassed catching your breath at the other end. So making sure you know what works for you and don't just necessarily copy an unbroken length because you've seen it online and stuff like that. Make sure you break it up effectively. So next is sled pull. So same distance as sled push. You are doing 4 by 12.5 meter lengths. You do have an athlete box. This is really important because they've been a lot more stringent on rules over the last couple of years and movement standards. So always make sure you know movement standards for everything. When you're in the athlete box, your front toes cannot touch the white line, and the athlete box is where you pull, where you do the motion of the sled pull in, and your back heels cannot touch. You should always get 1 warning in a HYROX race, and then the next time you'll get a penalty. They've now moved to time-based penalties. Back in the day, they'd make you actually pull the sled an extra certain amount of meters, and now it's just time-based penalties. So you don't have to do anything extra. You just get time added on to your finish time at the end. So we always want to avoid unnecessary additional time, and one way is to know and really make sure you hone in on the movement standards and keep yourself accountable to them in training as well. So you're going to be pulling the sled. A rule of thumb I like to do is know how many sled pulls it takes me to get that sled 12.5 meters across the line. So the sled has to fully clear the white line when you're pulling it towards yourself in the athlete box, because that's also important too, because if I'm training at a gym that doesn't necessarily have 12.5 meter lengths, I know I do about 8.5 pulls or 8 pulls to hit 12.5 meters. So now I can always replicate my sled pulls. And then another really important piece for you guys in training too is, I've gone to gyms where this turf is super slippery, where you feel like, I could push men's pro weight, no problem. That's not what is reality in a HYROX race. So making sure that you mimic race conditions in training as closely as possible, because you don't want to go into a station with this idea of what the RP is going to feel like, and then all of a sudden it is like 10 times harder than what you'd originally thought of. You start to freak out, that anxiety jacks your heart rate, etc. So you just need to be well prepared going into a race and know what race conditions feel like.
Station 4 is burpee broads. Everybody's probably least favorite or second least favorite of, at least for most people. This is the one that usually jacks everybody's heart rate the most, because they go in and it's an up-down motion. Your heart is moving on different planes of motion, which causes it to get higher. It's a push-up exercise. Your chest has to hit the ground. You have to jump with both feet at the same time, and it's 80 meters long. So by the time you're done with those 80 meters, you're definitely going to be probably zone 5 for your heart rate, and then you have to go out and run again. So there are lots and lots of burpee techniques, and different ones work better for some people than they do for others. So I would definitely suggest either finding a coach and asking them to talk to you about them, or finding some online on YouTube, and practicing all of them, so that way you can switch it up mid-race if you need to. There's plenty of people that switch between different techniques, and that is okay. Myself, I personally do that for a solo race for sure, based off of energy, what I need to do, where I'm at. And again, this isn't something that we're not trying to do this race to look like the best athlete out there. We're trying to be as efficient as possible. So what works efficiently for you? I've seen people that do certain techniques that are very slow for me that work really well for them, and they have phenomenal burpee times, and other techniques that look efficient, and then when you see the person running after, they're running much slower than they were before. So burpees is a lot more of the kind of mid-race, like you have to hold back until after burpees with your running a lot of times, but it's because you want to have the energy going into burpees and coming out of burpees so that you can run really well. In its entirety by itself, 80 meters of burpee broads fresh is not going to kill someone. But in a mid-race, it can really put a big damper on your race. Anything to add on that, Maria?
Yeah, I think like just most importantly, I always tell my athletes to be very steady on them. You don't need to go super, super hard again, and it's all based on what you're able to run off of and where you're at aerobically in the race and how much lactate accumulation you have and all that. You want to make sure that you are keeping a steady rhythm instead of just doing short, quick bursts. You'll fatigue way more. You also want to think about what technique works best for you, but then also like how far to jump, for example. Like I've seen some people, that have come to our classes that jump very, very far, and they exert a lot of energy, and then they tire out after maybe like 10 jumps. So what's the way that you can move the most efficiently while being able to maintain a steady effort? And I think that's really important, again, to practice in training, and just making sure that you're picking the thing that's the most efficient and the less taxing for you and where you're at in your fitness level. Because we'll see some really amazing elite athletes that are doing the frog technique where they don't step up, they just kind of jump up and jump again. Some like Hunter McIntyre, obviously one of the best in the world, is able to do that type of technique and still run really efficiently off of. Do we recommend that for everybody? No. But again, you have to find what's most efficient for you and the least taxing to get the best output at the end of the day. Okay, so station number 5 is rowing. So rowing, this is a great opportunity if you are taking any nutrition in a race, for example, but first opportunity in the race to sit down. So station 5, so now you've gone over half of the race, you've done 5 runs, 3 are coming up left. So again, all the ergs, as Mike said, you have that opportunity to see what pacing is. And always make sure you're going by RPE too. So things can change in a race depending on how fatigued you get, how you're feeling performance-wise, mentally, etc. So when in doubt, always go by RPE. But on this station, for example, you're going to run in damper set out of 6 again. You can change it as much as you want. You can't leave until you hit 1,000 meters. And this is just a very smooth, steady station as well, similar to skier, very controlled. This is not an opportunity, to go all out. Different if you are in a double scenario versus a solo scenario. I want to say that too. A lot of this information is very much based on like a solo competitor's perspective. There is nuance when you are doing doubles. You can hit a little harder because you do get calculated breaks, whereas when you're solo, it's you and you, yourself, and I. If you take a break, it just continues to add to your time, and you can't rely on anybody else to do the work or to support the work. So making sure that you pace this really effectively, and it's a crucial moment in the race, and I always tell people this is a great opportunity to then think about how you're going to attack the back half of the race. How's run pacing feeling like? How are your legs feeling? Do you feel like you could push running, or do you feel like you want to keep running where it's at? You know what's coming up. You have farmer carry, which is a super quick station, exaggerated weighted walking, getting that done as quickly and effectively as possible. And you kind of can make a plan in your head over those like 4 to 5 minutes that you are rowing to figure out where you're at and check in with yourself in terms of RP and how you want to attack the back half of the race.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. This is the check-in point. This is where racing really starts to set people apart from the people that went too hard at the very beginning of the race. Pacing yourself through this, but also knowing like you're already halfway through. So this is where you start to pick up. And same thing in a marathon, you always look for that negative split. Negative split is exactly what you want here is, okay, we're halfway through. Can I run even 2 seconds faster on each of these runs? Can I push a little bit harder so that my second half of my race is faster than the first half? And then going into farmer's carry is typically the shortest station for 99% of people. And this is just exaggerated heavy walking, essentially, shuffling, moving as quickly as you can. There's not a lot of like issues that we usually see here, other than people need to have, decent grip. I think that there's kind of two thoughts on how to grip the kettlebells for this, but making sure that you always apply chalk when you get into this station is really important. And then not letting those kettlebells out of your hands unless they're like literally falling out of your hands, because once you set them down, you have to negotiate with yourself even for that 5 seconds to pick them back up. So the biggest thing here is making sure that when you are doing this, really try to keep a good grip on your kettlebells and don't set them down until that last possible second that you actually need to. The discomfort in your hands is going to be there, but you don't really need your hands for much more in this race. You've already done the pull, you've already done the burpees. You don't really need a grip for walking lunges or for the wall balls, so you can let out the rest of your grip here and just be moving as quickly as you can within what you're able to.
Yeah, and I think another important piece is thinking about like short, fast steps and obviously not forgetting to breathe. I think because you should be bracing obviously your core when you are doing farmer carry, just make sure that you're also breathing as well. I think that's an important reminder. So after that, you're going to drop those kettlebells where you found them, usually outside of the station itself. You make sure you drop them with the horns up. You can get a penalty if you actually don't put them back where they are or if you throw them. So make sure they're back exactly where you found them. And then you're going to head out, hit your next run, and then we're going to come into sandbag lunges. So again, always making sure you know, depending on what category you're in, what bag you're picking up. Because sometimes there's multiple races going on. They might think you're in a different category. You've heard people where they've done the whole station with the wrong bag and they have to go back and redo it with the right bag. So it's making sure you know which sandbag you are picking up. Multiple handles and opportunities where you want to hold it, and practice cleaning it up and getting it on your back as efficiently as possible. It has to lie across both shoulders. You need to make sure you're coming to full hip extension. So you start behind the line and your first step can then be over the line. Knee has to hit the ground at every rep. And you have to come to full hip extension. So I've noticed that they're actually being a little more stringent on that too in races, meaning like you have to come to full stance. Your knee needs to be fully extended at the top before you take your next step. And they'll usually tell you if they feel like, you need to make sure that you're overemphasizing that you're coming up, because you can't stay low and stay under tension and do your lunges quicker that way. So you have to make sure that you are coming to full extension. You cross, depending on the type of race setup, you're either going to do 4 by 25 meters or usually 2 by 50. 2 by 50 is my favorite because there's less break and it forces you to continue to move. Multiple ways that you can effectively do a sandbag lunge. Obviously you can lunge and then you can bring, we call it the wedding step, where your feet come parallel to the other before you take your next step. Obviously you need to alternate legs. Or you can do a step through where your foot just comes through and then your knee hits down and you never actually take that kind of stabilizing step. Or another way that we see is people drag their leg at the back to bring to their center of gravity. Just gives them that little bit of rest before they move into that next step and a little bit of a quote unquote break. And then this one too is just, I find it a very grindy station. You'll typically do about 100 lunges, give or take, depending on how wide your stance is. So I think that's really important to note. So it is a high volume exercise. Strength endurance and muscular endurance are important here. But again, like we talked about, you don't have to be the strongest person, but you just have to be able to do this type of station effectively at the end after you already have done 7 runs and you are pretty fatigued. So then when you're done that, cross over that back line and again, dropping that bag off where you found it, which is typically sitting in piles outside of the station when you're done.
2 things to add on this one, actually. Number one is don't overstride this. A lot of people think, oh, well, it's a specific number of meters, just like burpees. So in burpees, they try to jump as far as possible. Here, they try to make a stride as long as possible. And for most people, by this point, because of how fatigued you are, your hamstrings and your quads can't take that. So going to 90 degrees and thinking about pushing off of the heel of that front foot is the best thing to do versus trying to get this really long stride in and then the stabilizing muscles don't allow you to do that. I've even gone shorter at the very beginning than 90 degrees just because I'm very unstable at the very beginning of lunges. So I think that's really helpful. And something that I do with wall balls, lunges, and burpees now is I count. So, and Burpees, I count to 8 and then I start over again. Another 8, start over again. With wall balls, I do whatever my smart sets are. I'll get to that in a second. And lunges, it's the same thing. I count to 10, start over again. Count to 10, start over again. And I know typically with lunges, it takes me about 14 lunges to go 12.5 meters. So I'm still going a little less than that in my head, but it gives you something to focus on for these stations versus just saying, oh my gosh, I have to go the whole way down and the whole way back. Like that seems very daunting for a lot of people. So whether that's a 5, an 8, a 10, start back over again. I think that's the best way to get through burpees, lunges, and wall balls for sure. With wall balls specifically, you run in, typically your time on this lap doesn't stop until you are into the wall ball area, which is different from all the others where you have an in arch and you're coming in. You still have an in arch that you're coming in on, but your time on this doesn't stop until you get there. So if you're looking at your times after the fact and you're like, oh, I was running a 5:30 pace and then I saw this and it was, 5:40, I don't get it. They must have messed up my timing. They didn't. It's just that they add that into, there's no rock zone, so to speak, which is the transition area, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. So with wall balls, like I said, we're looking for smart sets. And this is something that we think, and I'm sure that Maria would agree because I hear her talk about this a lot with her clients, is we don't think everybody should be trying to do 100 unbroken. It's unrealistic. It's very, very tough at this part of the race. You could probably do 150 wall balls fresh if you're a good wall baller, no problem. When you get into a race situation, you've already run 8K, you've done lunges, you've done all these very heavy taxing things on your legs, even though the weights aren't that heavy. Your legs are very tired at this point, and your cardio system is pretty taxed as well. So breaking this up into sets and knowing how many you can do fatigued is very important here. And then taking a couple off of that. So for me, I know I can do 30 fatigued wall balls, no problem. In a doubles race, yes, I'll probably do 30 to 40 and really try to push through because I know I'm going to get this very large break while my partner is doing wall balls most of the time. But when you're doing a solo race, it's very important to know I could do 30, but if I do 20, I'm going to be saying, why did I stop? Take 5 seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and pick up that ball and go again. We've had a lot of success with clients that have broken it up and known I'm going to do exactly 20. I'm going to count to 5 quickly, and I'm going to pick the ball right back up and move on. You can go very, very close to unbroken times by doing that. And then if you're like, wow, I could have gone more wall balls at a time, great. The next race, do 25 and see how it goes. Or, if you're doing a sim, that's when you practice those things. Don't go into a race saying, I'm going to do as many wall balls as I can, and then I'm going to do the rest of them. It's never going to happen, and there's no plan to that. So wall balls needs to be more of a plan. If it's 15 and then you're taking a break, great. Do that versus doing 50 and then having to take 30 seconds of rest, and then you're doing sets of 3 or 5. That is always going to end up being longer, and you're going to have like a 14-minute wall ball time here, which I've had clients do because that's how they started to do it, and it never works well that way. So the smart sets is super important here. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of people. Everybody's standing there yelling and screaming at you to finish because the finish line is literally steps away. But you need to stick to your plan here, and that is probably the biggest number one thing with 100 reps. Just like Maria said, you're doing 100 reps of lunges. Most of these things, you're doing 100 reps of everything. It's just wall balls is the one that they actually say 100 reps on. So you actually have to quantify that in your head. There's counters there, so you don't even have to count if you don't want to, but I do find I'll count to 10, and I'll do another set of 10, and then I'll do another set of 10, and you just keep doing those sets of 10 in your head or whatever it is. For me, it's probably closer to 20, 25, depending on, that, but I always stick to that plan. And then there's other people that they start at 25 because they know they can do 25, then they do 24, then they do 23, and they go down by 1 because it just makes it feel that much easier for them. So there's plenty of different techniques here. The biggest thing is knowing how you're going to do it, and don't go in expecting to do 100 wall balls unbroken or just saying I'm going to do as many as possible. Once you're done with wall balls, your counter will say that you're done with the wall balls. It also tells you if you got a no rep, whether it's for depth, because that's the other thing that we see with a lot of people is that their depth doesn't get below where they need to be. So it's your hips have to be below your knees. Your hip crease has to be below your knees on these. And there's judges that are watching. Don't argue with a judge. It's not going to do anything except for just cost you a lot of time. So if the judge and you're seeing it's unfair, it is what it is for the day. That's just the way it's going to be. If you have someone close by and they're seeing this, they can start to video and you can always go and dispute that after the fact. But don't argue with the judge in the moment. It's not going to do anything for you. When you're done, it'll say 100 wall balls on the screen, and then you run across to the finish line, making sure that you don't impede anybody else that's also doing their wall balls. So find a clear pathway either behind everybody that's doing wall balls or between the rigs, as long as it's safe to do that. Anything to add on that, Maria?
No, I think just like the important part with this one, like, yes, it is at the end of the race, like Mike mentioned, re-emphasizing, like, do the number of reps and sets that you can do, that you've practiced, that you're very confident in. The biggest mistake people make here is trying to do too many at once. Then they're completely taxed and they blow up. And then they start doing sets of 2 and 1. Whereas if you had just done even 10 sets of 10 with 5 seconds of rest, and you always count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pick up that ball and restart. Also, the another important thing is in training, hold yourself accountable to depth. Don't just try to get your set of 50 done in training and be done with it. And if you felt like you're going short on depth and stuff like that, always make sure you're practicing depth. That is one of the most critiqued things in the wall ball station. And something we get people to do in training is stick a wall ball under their butt, and the rep doesn't count unless your butt touches that wall ball, because it forces, for most people, to get your hip crease below 90 degrees. You should know what that feels like in space, because your judge will be telling you to get lower. They'll no rep you, you'll see that, etc. And then also the other important piece for this too is make sure that you practice with a target, because if you're throwing against a wall, I've had that happen to me before too, you have the depth perception of the wall, but when you're at the rig, you don't. So it's knowing how far away from like the target to stand. And then the last thing too, which we didn't touch on, which is important in a lot of stations, is core strength. So being able to hold your body in an upright position, super important. So making sure you're incorporating a lot of core into your training, because that will serve you well across majority of these stations, especially even in the wall ball component of upright torso, and being able to stay upright. And then the biggest pointers that I find have helped people are 3 points of contact, both your hand and your chin, and always keeping your eyes at the target. When people start to look down, they start to bring the ball down with them, creating additional fatigue or additional like movement that you don't need. You want to be, again, movement efficiency in all these stations is super, super important. So getting the best output for the least amount of work is what we're looking for across all the HYROX stations. So with that, I think that was a good overview of the 8 stations. And I think, we gave a lot of like do's and don'ts and just like important facts across all of them.
Yeah. Can I ask? I was writing questions down because I think I have some good questions. I don't know. There could be idiot questions. We'll find out. But sure. I think I have some questions or thoughts on this that I could see people listening or new HYROX athletes asking. And so the first one I wrote down was on burpee broad jumps. And so you had talked about there's multiple different techniques or ways to do it. Would you guys as coaches look at the anthropometrics of the person? So as an example, like when we did a workout together, Mike, like my burpee broad jump was very different than yours. And I know you're a taller, bigger guy, right? So is there a different technique depending on the anthropometrics of an athlete that you might look at in terms of like coaching a technique for that individual person versus just saying, go do burpee broad jumps for X?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely different techniques based off of what your body is and also your level of mobility. So for a runner, for instance, getting, from that push-up position and bringing one foot to your hands is probably near impossible because you're just extremely tight in your hips. So doing maybe a knee up technique would be more beneficial there. And that's one of those techniques that I think everybody can benefit at some point during the race. Or creating more space. There's multiple ways to go about how to do burpees. It's finding that one that works for that individual person. And again, it's testing different things over and over in different scenarios. Because I could get to wall or to burpees and my hips are tight that day. So I can't do my normal burpee technique. So I have to switch on the spot and be able to do a different technique. Or I get halfway through and I'm just feeling something. So I need to go to a different technique, even if it's just for 5 or 6 burpees, to allow my body to kind of adjust and to help me out there.
Yeah, perfect. I love it. One thing I wanted to ask too, or kind of make an analogy that I think will help people rather, is you guys have both cycled. So anybody with like a cycling background that's cycled in a group, I think you can carry over the pacing idea that you do in cycling. So if you're on the front making a pull, don't go until you're broken and about to fall off thinking that draft's going to save you right away, because you'll be blown out the back. You still need it. And I think in what I'm watching athletes on the HYROX side, and you guys noted this very articulately about stopping before your break point, I liken it to cycling, where if you're on the front hammering away to try and prove that you can hold on to the group, you're only going to find out that you're getting dropped after in the back. Does that resonate with you guys?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think like that's actually a great way to put it. Like stop before your breaking point. Stop before you're completely taxed. Because then it becomes again like that surviving piece or falling off or blowing up, or you hear people say I blew up on the sleds because they didn't pace appropriately or blew up after sleds. You see this amazing like front half of a race and then you see this like downward trend. You're like, uh-oh, uh-oh, uh-oh. You see pace start to slow. You start to see like, 350 first run. Man, that person's flying. Then by run 5, you see like 415. You're like, oh, they're hurting. Like they went out way too hot. So I think like to your point, stopping before that breaking point, and I think it takes a mature athlete to know what that is too.
Yeah.
And that's how we try to coach people to think about too. And I think that's where you also sometimes have to like let go of ego. And I've had clients where they're like, we give them the wall ball plan, 20 reps. Don't be doing any more than 20 reps. I'd rather you tell me after the race, Maria, I could have did 25, than you try to go 40 and then we blow up your wall ball time and then it ruins like the race plan. So I'd rather that happen than like the latter kind of thing. And the person stuck to it. They had a crazy good wall ball time for their second race ever and PB'd by like 4 minutes. So I think it's like it takes a maturity to know that. Sometimes it takes a coach to also coach that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, and Brant, we're going to get into this with the running. It's the same thing with the run. Someone can say, I want to run 4:30s, and if you say, why don't you run 4:45s, you actually have a better productive race, and you actually can go faster. I think that it's very hard to swallow that ego, but once you can figure that out and say that you're racing against yourself and only yourself at that level, then that's what's important. When you get up into the elite level, there's other things obviously going on, but at the kind of intermediate level, you don't even know who's around you, to be honest with you. It's not like you're with the rest of your age group or anything. You're with 50 other people, and some of them might be 65 and some of them might be 21, So if you're a 40-year-old like me, sitting in the middle, you're like, that dude kind of looks old. That guy looks really old, but you just don't know.
Yeah. No, I love it. No, I appreciate you guys answering those questions, because I've got a couple more that I think we'll do kind of on the run and the later side. But I loved that section. So thanks for breaking that down. And before we move on to the running, I want to touch on the rock zone, because I know we've talked about this prior, that this is a spot where athletes can like just bleed time really. And so can you guys first explain what that is, and then, maybe from a high level overview, and then provide tips, tools, tricks that you guys have seen both racing and coaching to help athletes really nail the rock zone in particular?
If you've seen a triathlon, it's the same idea as the transition zone. This is the zone that like, it's almost no man's land, but at the same time, it counts towards your race time. So there's people that will go in there. There's a water station. There's a Red Bull station. They walk, they enjoy themselves. They're there dancing. Some people seeing rock zone times, I think they must have had couches there or something, because they sit down. And the same thing in triathlon. You see these people come in and then it's like, why did your swim to bike take 15 minutes? Did you
gear change?
Yeah. Like what were you doing? But it's the time that people truly do bleed a lot of time, because they come in and they think, okay, I did my 1K run. Next, I have to go here. And then they just take their time sauntering to that. That's still part of your time. So really, at the end of the day, what you should be doing is you should be running and then coming into the station. And I know Maria and I both do this. We tell a lot of our clients to do this. It might not be for everybody, but you almost do a stride going in from the beginning of the rock zone where you come in to the station, where you pick up the legs, you get the legs moving a little bit differently because your legs are about to do something different anyway. So just like from swim to bike on a triathlon, when you're in that position swimming for, half a mile, 2 miles, you need to get those legs moving so that they move correctly going to the next station or to the next thing, which is your bike. So you really want to start thinking about getting blood flowing. So you go into there and you think about blood flowing a little differently. It also helps you to keep that intensity up as you go into whatever that station is. And you don't stop until you are at that station. You don't just run from the in arch to the barrier that says, sled push, and then walk to your sled and start pushing. You want to run and essentially like run your body into the sled.
And I think just to be clear, to define it is anytime you are not in a station but not on the run course. So anytime you enter the in-arch before you get to your next station, there's a chunk of time that they time and accumulate, known as your rock zone time. So if it takes you 30 seconds from the in-arch to get to the ski erg, that's 30 seconds of rock zone time. And what the other thing I think people forget or get wrong is they look at their runs independently from like run 1, run 2, run 3, run 4, all the way to run 8 and compare it to a different venue. And they'll be like, man, I was 10 seconds faster at my second race. You weren't. So add your full run time. So runs 1 through 8 plus rock zone time. And always look at rock zone as an extension of your run. The race doesn't stop. You're still running. So that idea of picking up a stride, because sometimes you have to do a full stop to turn in to go into the rock zone. Having a pickup actually helps get you back up to race pace effort to get to that next station. As Mike mentioned, like you don't stop in the rock zone ideally, but this is where people will grab water and walk. But again, too, if you're trying to be more of a competitive athlete, different story. You want to maintain run pace in the rock zone, and your full run time, accumulation of all 8 runs plus rock zone time divided by 8.7 kilometers. So that's what's supposed to be standardized across the race, is that it's 8.7 kilometers, and that is your true race pace. So when you see 4-minute kilometers, 4:10, 4:15, whatever on your 1 through 8, but then you have an 8-minute rock zone, you need to add that in and take that into account. So I've had clients say, man, I was faster at this race. And then when I go in and calculate, I'm like, actually, you're a minute and a half faster at this race because I added your run times and your rock zone times. And that gives us true HYROX race pace.
I love it. Okay. Anything else either of you want to add on stations, rock zone? I know we did a fairly good deep dive there, but just before we move on to running, is there anything you were like, aha, maybe I should add that in because I see that with, my clients or, even yourselves racing?
Yeah, just one thing I will say too that I meant to add is like after you finish a station, like if I finish station 1 and I finish the ski, I say mentally, sled push is next. So I know, and when I'm on my last lap before going in the inn, I look to make sure I remember where sled push is, because when I come in, I don't want to be like, where am I going again? Especially if you're trying to be competitive, you know exactly where you're running. Finish sled push, I go at the out and I go sled pull. So I have it in my head. I know where I'm going next. It's a good reminder, so you don't mess up the station order.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know how y'all do it because in triathlon, I'd be like, hey, what rack am I in and which row out of the swim out and bike in and such.
That sounds stressful.
No, yours is way more stressful. I promise you. It's
Oh,
way
okay.
easier to find 2 of them. Yeah, yours is way more stressful. But yeah, okay. No, that's fantastic. And I hope everybody learns a lot from that. And so as we flip to running, I'll probably go on a super long diatribe here. So go ahead and have some drinks there, you two. But I think running is probably, I think both sides, depending on where you're coming from, are like completely misunderstood, right? Like endurance athletes coming over to HYROX misunderstand the strength side and the station side, and strength athletes coming over misunderstand the aerobic side. And so, I'm going to break this aerobic side down, I think, from a base level of knowledge and give everybody the best way to look at it for HYROX, regardless of where you're coming from. I'm also going to link the videos I've made on each pacing so people can actually like go and learn about that type of pacing mode, why it's important, rather than spending 90 minutes talking about why easy pace is exactly important in marathon pace, etc. So we'll link those here so you can see them. But when we look at HYROX, like I have a bias that I'm a run coach. I look at it as an actual like endurance problem that we're trying to solve. And I don't think you guys disagree really. It's just got strength components to it. And so the first thing I think of when I look at a HYROX athlete, and when I first started working with you guys, I was like, this is a huge lever that we can pull. Like you can only push a sled so fast. It's a set distance. You can only gain so much, right? But with I'll call it 8 by a K, 8.7K. I know Maria said with the rock zones, but for 8K, like you can exponentially gain. Like you can't push a sled, let's say 20 seconds faster if you're really doing well at that. But if you get really good at running, you can run 5, 10, 15 seconds a K faster, add it up over 8, plus better fitness in the rock zone and carrying over, then lower heart rate going into the stations. Like it's the biggest lever as an athlete I think you have in HYROX to pull to increase performance. And so I think it depends where you're at on the finishing time spectrum, but my argument would be that like 50 to 60, maybe even 70% for some people of the total time that you're doing a HYROX is running related. And so it's more than half your race, yet we'd love to do the sexy stuff in the gym and show off how many wall balls and stuff we can do. I know you two are great at wall balls, but I'm gonna say we're gonna focus on the running here. And so the other piece is that it deteriorates the fastest. Now, you could argue, obviously, that burpees, wall balls, lunges will all deteriorate as well. But I would argue that that's an aerobic problem that's masquerading as a strength problem, because the more aerobically fit you are, the more you can actually recover within it. And so when we look at that, I think as an athlete and as a coach, why wouldn't I want to pull the biggest levers possible to have the maximal change in performance? Because if the central question we're trying to answer is, how do I get better at this? And if the answer to getting better at it is being a better runner, well, let's pull that lever all the time. And so, which leads me into, my next point, that HYROX running is not normal running. And if I were to go out and coach like an elite athlete, let's say, so you guys, 60 to 70-ish minutes, and, there's obviously athletes listening who are taking longer than that. But if I look at, one of my athletes who's a 63-minute half marathon runner, he's doing roughly the same time that Mike or Maria are going to be doing out there, but he's not throwing in surges every 3.5 to 4 minutes, depending on the station. And so it's a very different type of running than running specific. I would still contend that you can get maximal benefits for your HYROX runs by training like an actual runner. And I don't mean you have to go run 100 miles a week. We can have cross training on the bike. With both Mike and Maria, we use cross training quite a bit, but you do need to run. And so I think at first, for most athletes, you shouldn't be doing, and I'll open this up in a second for you guys, but I don't think at first you should be doing compromised running. I think you should actually be running as a runner and doing proper run workouts to get the maximal benefit of running to be able to carry that over. Any thoughts on that hot take there, you two?
Yeah, I would say I agree with you on that. Like any training we do for people, like Mike and I aren't the type to like give people like a compromised run session. We actually save that for like later in the training cycle. We think it's overdone, but again, too, I think learning like building that base, learning proper run mechanics, and just getting better at running in general will serve, and just building a better base will serve people so much better than hammering these like compromised runs every week, and you're like 20 weeks out from your next HYROX race. I don't think that's where people can get the most benefit, like we talked about. Like a lot of people are missing the years of development. So like why not spend the time doing that and building that really strong base, and then that's when you start to sprinkle in the like sexy workouts like later on. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, it again, it depends on your background. And I know, Brant, you and I had this conversation recently where we're getting ready for Worlds this year, and I don't need to do a lot of like compromised running, because the running that we're doing has been more beneficial than doing more compromised running, which since I have such a high level of compromised running from triathlon background, I don't need that because I already understand how to do that. I can already do that efficiently. And I think a lot of people don't realize that like it's going to feel different, but it's not that different. You don't need to be doing compromised sessions every week, you know, 12 weeks out even, or 8 weeks out even. I keep that for usually 4 weeks out from a race. So I think that it's super important there to know that, yes, as you're beginning some of that stuff, it's low hanging fruit. It's easy to do, but the running session themselves, it's better to separate them, from everything. And then one other thing, Brant, that I just wanted you to kind of like talk on a little bit with this, is like, we talked about like the running is the biggest like low hanging fruit. The better you can get, the faster you can go. But it also intrinsically helps to add value to your stations, because the faster you can run, the more of that endurance base you've already built means you can come out of burpees and yeah, you might be feeling like you're running a 5K at that point, but you could still do it. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good add on to the lever piece that we put forward. So when you increase your aerobic capacity, so base training, aerobic ability, mitochondria, whatever language you want to use for it, two major things happen. You get inter and intra recoverability. And so the more easy running you do, the more you recover between your hard bouts. So you actually adapt better in your training ahead of racing. But you also, more importantly, and this is why you see athletes who do a lot of volume, like easy volume, can do big sessions, is because in between the hard reps, they recover faster than a typical age grouper. And so when you go about training properly aerobically for a HYROX athlete, exactly like you just said, Mike, you can go and not hammer yourself as if you're flat out on row or ski erg or burpee broad jumps, but your ability to bring your heart rate back down is that much better. And so when we look at HYROX, it's essentially like spiked, flat, like a heart rate if you look at the graph of it for most athletes. And so the faster you can recover from your station work, which spikes your heart rate, the faster you can go on the runs. And the only way to do that is actually to become really aerobically fit. And so I'll introduce here, I call it the marathon hierarchy, but it applies to every distance runner, essentially from 1500 to marathon and beyond. And so if you think of training as a triangle, and you first have aerobic training, and then you have, let's call it marathon pace or steady state, tempo, and intervals. And so, yes, the intervals will help. The fast stuff, the hard stuff does help 1000%, but it only helps if you've actually done the stuff underneath it to sustain the ability to do big intervals. And so for HYROX athletes in particular, especially if you're doing big gym sessions, if you have a coach that's doing big gym sessions, or you like doing big gym sessions, or you're doing in and out stuff, stations, runs, whatever, you're actually going to get more bang for your buck on that if you've stacked it with a bunch of easy aerobic work. And so one of the things that I like doing with HYROX athletes, you guys and a couple of my other athletes, is implementing the bike to get that easy aerobic load. Because for a lot of the time, if you're doing ancillary lifts, high wall ball sets, any plyo stuff for speed and power development, you're going to get a lot of peripheral nervous system and peripheral fatigue. And so the running only kind of compounds to that. So then you can't hit your stations hard enough in the race, or your workouts hard enough to create the adaptation. And so this is why for HYROX athletes, my belief is that you should do probably more easy running and maybe 1-2 max run workouts a week. And I would say 2 max once you're experienced and you've come close to maximizing the gains you can get from the aerobic load. Because as we talked about with that lever problem, if you can just recover better, you're probably going to gain for the typical beginner or age group right there. You're probably going to gain 3 to 5 minutes just from recovering better between stations and being able to run a little bit faster on runs. And so from a prescription standpoint, the way I would look at this is the question I would always ask is, how much can you do without it affecting your hard stuff? And so for a lot of people, that might only be 45 minutes because they haven't properly easy trained before. They get bored, they're tired from it, and that's fine. But it doesn't mean that just because it makes you tired or sore or you're bored that you should skip it. So for most people, like if I was looking at a program, and this is kind of for big chunks of the year, what I'll do with you two is we'll do Monday easy, Tuesday a tempo or progressive type run, Wednesday easy, Thursday easy, Friday an interval mile to 3K, 5K, maybe 10K, depending on where we're at in the block. Saturday longer bike, Sunday longer run. And so, depending on the year and where you guys are at with your gym work in particular, some of those easy runs might be easy runs, some of them might be bike, and it also depends on the person too. And so, that's the way I kind of look at the week. And I know like the three of us, like you, Mike and I co-coach Maria. Mike leads on a lot of it and I lead on the running. Mike has a strength coach that I coordinate with the run coaching and coordinate with Mike. And so it depends on the phase and the block we're in, but the central tenets all remain the same. We're doing quite a bit of easy volume. And what Mike had alluded to a little bit earlier with his running really taking a big jump here right now is this idea of compromise sessions, I think, means something different. And in the HYROX world, it means having the stations in it. I look at proper workout design being compromise training. And so one of the bigger things that I changed in Mike's training and I've introduced into Maria's training is workouts with minimal recovery. So if we're doing like quarters on the track, it's like 100-meter jog recovery. We're not taking 2 minutes kind of thing. Or we're doing fartlek style workouts where they're having to recover on their feet at like e-pace, like typical running e-pace. And so I find where a lot of people go wrong on the running side, and I'll back up and be a historian here for a second, is if you look at the etiology of kind of HYROX, it came from triathlon / CrossFit and then morphed into HYROX. That's really the path it kind of came in. And if you look at in North America in particular, when triathlon took off in the 90s and the 2000s, and when CrossFit took off in the late 2000s, North America was in this low volume, high intensity type spectrum of training. And it corresponded with the worst results internationally we have seen from the US in endurance sport. And now when you look at the top training, like I think last year there was world records in men's track in the 3,000, the 5,000, and the 800. And all of those athletes are doing way more aerobic and less speed. And so this is the thing that I think we're having to contend with the coaching system within HYROX. And I'm not trying to bash it here, but more so look at it from an educational perspective, is backing up and looking and seeing what's working across different sports. And you see in triathlon, you see in rowing, you see in running now, it's mega amounts of easy volume stacked with the specific thing. So if I was a beginner and I hadn't had any running experience, I would look at it and go, can I bike super easy for 45 minutes a day? Like, can I do that? That's probably enough. I went on a big rant there. What do you guys think, or what questions do you have?
I think like that's actually something I was going to ask you to define for people, because I think that a lot of words get thrown around online, like compromised running. What does that actually mean for people? And I think in the high rock space, like you touched on, a lot of people look at it as like station to run, station to run. But I think it's super cool and interesting they brought the running lens, and you're like, actually no, it's like harder efforts with minimal rest, or moving recoveries versus like standing rest. So I think
Yeah.
that's really important, and also another really cool tool people can incorporate. Like you don't have to, like we've talked about, have to pound station to run, station to run, station to run. Of course there's a time and a place for it when you need like race specific training, but I think like that piece what you said is interesting, a runner's new spin on like what compromised running is. And I think that's like important for people to understand too, and though that also has its time and place to incorporate.
Yeah. And I mean, going back to what we said when we first started, like, go back to the basics, because the basics is what works, right? Like the super sexy, like speed work on the track, it's fine once a week, but everything else needs to be like this big aerobic base. And people just miss that because it's boring. You're doing it for longer. It's not really fun. It's just the stuff that you have to do. But that's the stuff that actually makes the needle move versus like this big workout, where you're like, oh, I just did 25 by 400, in 900-degree heat or whatever. I'm like, that doesn't sound fun to me. I'd rather go out and run 90 minutes or bike for 3 hours and enjoy myself than like be throwing up in a trash can.
Yeah.
And I think, sorry, I had
Go
one
ahead.
other thing I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure that you touched on, or like that I think would be valuable for people to hear from you on, is like the perspective of like RPE, which is something, you've really instilled in Mike and I that I think is very valuable for people to understand. And like, we've talked about like threshold pace and stuff like that. And you're like, well, it can change, right? Depending on fatigue and peripheral fatigue and recovery and stuff like that. So I think like for beginners and stuff, like can you talk a little bit more about like the importance of RP in training relative to high rocks as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great point. So RPE, I've got a calculator where you can put in like your race time and it'll give you an RPE that corresponds with each training stimulus: easy pace, marathon pace, tempo pace, interval pace, etc. So I'll link that because I think that's a really helpful piece to get some quantitative piece. But when I look at RPE, I'm always asking questions, right? So when I first started working with you guys, it's less so now because we've got good communication and I kind of know how you guys adapt. But it's like, how did that feel? And I joke about this with my athletes, and I talk about this in my YouTube running stuff, where it's like people are so sick of that question, but it forces you to go, okay, well, how did I actually feel? Was this the right effort? And it allows me to understand where you're at so I can make modifications to training. So if you're doing easy aerobic work, the question I would ask myself, and it won't always be the correct answer because some days you're just completely screwed and you don't even want to do what you're trying to do at a slow effort, is could I just keep doing this if I needed to? Could I do this for 2-3 hours? If Brant said, like, or Mike said, or Maria said, you got to do this for 3 hours, could I do it? If the answer is yes, you're probably in the right zone. And so when I look at the research across what's best in terms of pacing, heart rate, RPE, it always comes back RPE time and time again in the literature is the best way to support it because there's no metric. I don't care if it's HRV. I don't care if it's, heart rate or percentage heart rate or pace from a Daniels method. I don't care what it is. The best way that you're going to learn and be able to develop your training is understanding a proper correlated RPE. And I think where this goes wrong is a lot of us like to go into what I call ego pacing versus reality pacing. So it's like my ego says this is easy because I like the number or the idea that's attached to it. And so what people do is they couple something that's not actually easy with the feeling of easy because their ego is attached to it. And so like I think Maria, if I can pick on you a little bit, you had a bit of this at the start when we started working together. We were like, I actually like, yeah, you're like, hey, who are you? Yeah. But it was like, no, like I'm this elite athlete. Like I need to be doing these things. And sure enough, as we uncoupled those things, your performance, your workout execution became better and better. And as such, your confidence gained. And so it's a central tenet here to be able to understand, okay, what is like ego RP? I want this to feel easy because I love that 8-minute miles is easy and that looks good on Strava or whatever, versus like what's reality pacing. And I think it always comes back to the central question is, what am I trying to solve for today? Like when I look at training or when I'm talking to you guys, is what are we trying to solve for with this session that we're doing today? And the answer to me is always performance. And so I'm going to always drift in the direction of what's going to help performance. And so I think if you look at those things, the second piece I wanted to add it on HYROX running with the RPE is I believe, or I would contend, that you should start with a low RPE and a low pace, but expect your RPE to increase as the race goes on and your pace to potentially stay the same or get better. And so if you look at it from that standpoint, I think you'll correct a lot of the mistakes that happen in the first 200-300 meters, especially coming out of the beginning where they're like firing you guys out of a cannon, basically. Like they're hyping you up. And so I remember doing this with Maria before one of your races. We took from the app the paces and runs and rockstone splits from a bunch of top athletes. And I showed you how it's just like, it's this ascending split structure as they go through. And I said, well, what if you just started like 10 seconds slow? And most athletes would say, yeah, but then I'm 10 seconds behind going into ski erg. And it's like, okay, maybe. But like, what if then your next run is like 3 seconds faster than theirs because you haven't killed yourself? And then your next run is 3 seconds faster than theirs. And now all of a sudden you get to station 5, station 6, and you're like, that gal or that guy that was 10 seconds up on me in the first run is right beside me. And as athletes, we kind of know, you can sense like if someone's near you, if they're dying or if they're doing well, right? And all of a sudden you're pacing well because you've gone with reality pacing and not ego pacing. And you're like, the confidence starts building at station 5, station 6, run 6, run 7. You're like, I'm running through people. They can't even stay with me, right? And so when you look at like great execution of race splits, you'll see that actually happen. And I would contend, one, it's a better way for most athletes. I'll say, save for the elite of the elite who can really handle those really big spikes early on. You have elite athletes that can do that. But for 99% of the HYROX and running population, you can't handle that. And so if you go out slower with a low RPE, your RPE will rise, but your pace, I would argue, will decrease as you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was like an important piece, and to into what you said before too. I think like ego pacing, like you said, like there's like this mismatch in your head between like what you see, you're like, oh, this should be easy for me, so I'm gonna rank it as easy, versus, it's 30 degrees and there's 95% humidity, and like
Yeah.
it's okay that your pace is like 2 minutes slower. It's like what's easy for that day. And I think the important note is that it can change.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the most important things I think I took away from that.
Yeah. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes as coaches, we use technology almost too much instead of just the age old RPE is king. And I think it's good in some ways, and maybe it's something that like just needs to be rethought where with the technology that we have, we can build a workout and put it in someone's watch. So it's like we're standing there telling them run faster, run slower. But maybe for the easy runs, that's when it needs to be actually used so that the person is actually running easy. Whereas the faster runs is when you kind of allow more of like this open range and say this is based off of perceived effort. Um, so I think that's really important. And one thing that I know the three of us have talked about is if I look down and I'm running like an 8:30 and I say, "Oh, that feels easy," and then I think about these guys that are running 2:09 marathons,
Yeah.
and Brant, you have a guy that runs a 2:09 marathon, and his easy run is an 8:30. I'm like, this is not easy enough.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I use that all the time, and
Yeah,
I know we talked about this after Knobs ran 209 because I was chatting with you guys, and it was like, yeah, he runs as easy, runs at 8 minute miles on a treadmill, and we were all like, fuck, we got to slow down now, right, kind of thing. And so it's such a great lesson though, and why I love sharing that message is like, if that person who, like, I can tell you, contracts, potential Olympic spots, national team spots are on the line, like this guy's got more on the line than like any of the three of us do with our racing, to be honest, right? And it's
yeah,
like he sees value in that, right? So I was on this podcast with Zach Bitter, this really great ultra guy, and one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to him is he had this term, and I just like I fell in love with it, where it was he calls it competitive pressure, and so rather than going like, okay, this study says this or I saw this work, it's like, what is the amalgamation of what all the top people are doing? Because at the end of the day, the people with bonuses, contracts, championships, national teams, Olympic berths, their livelihood is on the line. They're going to do the things that work. They're going to try the things and they're going to find out what works. And so we can't like omit those type things. And so that's one of the really cool things that I love that I can bring to the HYROX community is like, I've traveled the world. I've talked to great coaches. I've talked to elite athletes. I've seen what they do on the endurance sphere. And it's not the friggin' nose strip or the ketone or the AG1 or any of that crap. It's that that'll get clipped. It's like all of those things are ancillary small percents. And oftentimes we get really stuck majoring in the minors when it's like you've just got all this stuff over here that you could get better at. And so, I think when we look at the running sphere in particular, the shit influencers online in running will sell like this workout will increase this workout will do this. It's like no single workout does anything. And this goes back to the underpinning philosophy we talked about at the beginning, where everything is connected and central to everything you're doing. And so I think about that when I'm trying to understand the question of how do I make HYROX athletes better runners so they can better perform on race day.
Hmm. I think that's a good
Yeah.
point. I think people look for sometimes like the quick fix. Like I think we're in a world where like you said, like the Amazon effect, kind of like you want it now. So people look for those like quick things. Like, is this gonna give me an edge? And it's like, how about you just build build your base like the rest of
Yeah.
the high end athletes have done for years and years and years and years to get to where they are. The no strip doesn't make them a good performer. It's what they've done for the past 5 years to build up to this moment. And I think it's easy to forget that and then look for like the quick, you know, by the 12-week build to HYROX, whatever, and I'm gonna get a sub 1 hour with this particular training program. And it's like, no, the person that has a sub 1 hour earned it through years and years of work, not a 12-week program kind of thing. So I think like that's also like kind of like the society we're in with like the instant, like the quick instant gratification. Is that the right word?
Yep.
And
Yep.
just like wanting like everything now and like the quick fixes.
So on the pacing front for HYROX, like I conceptualize it or try to teach athletes to conceptualize it by breaking the race down. I know both of you talked about this in terms of breaking down, sleds into 12 and a halves, or, Mike, you talked about counting 10s or 14s. So I think on the running perspective, I would break it down in terms of runs 1 and 2. And I think this is where I'll say it. Well, maybe we won't all agree, but I actually think your entire race is dictated based on what runs 1 and 2 are from a proper pacing perspective. If you go in way too over your head, I actually think it's over. It's really hard to come back from that. So I would say runs 1 and 2 need to be super controlled. So I would even go slower than your target pace on those first 2 runs, because you're going to have adrenaline, you're going to be going out too hard. Save it for the stations and save it for the meaty part of the race in the middle where you actually need that energy. I will argue to the day I die that you cannot get ahead no matter how much time you think you're gaining there. It's like interest at like a bad like payday loan lender. You pay it back exponentially in the back end. And so going out slower is absolutely crucial, especially for newer athletes. The runs 3 and 4, I think that's where you can start to lock in. You've probably got a pretty good idea how your day's going at that point. Your RPE is locked in, your effort rises, but your pace probably stays stable. Maybe after burpee broad jump, I think was the one we see the most kind of fluctuation post. I think, you said it earlier, Mike, that going from a different plane upward, it's the same as going from swim to run in the triathlon transition zone. There's a very high heart rate there. And then 5 and 6 is you're kind of holding on, right? That's where you got to save a little bit. You're going to start to, hopefully not, but for most athletes, they'll see a little bit of a drift there. So that's where I think it really comes down to, you're zooming in, any relaxation techniques you're doing, proper pacing coming out in the first lap in particular there to hold on. And then 7 and 8, it's what do you have, in the same way that it would be at the end of a 5K, half marathon, marathon. And so that's the way I would break it down. Do you guys think about it any differently?
I think, yeah, I'm pretty similar to you. I think that it needs to be managed the first up through burpee broads, really, is a trap if you run too fast. I break it down into kind of halves because that's just mentally how I break down my race. After burpee broads, everything on the back end, like that's when the race, really shows that difference between the people that just went out too hard and didn't. But I do agree, like you see these people and they go out and you're like, are we doing like 1K and we're done for the day? And I'm like, and I say this to athletes too, I'm like, if they go out and they're able to run that fast and consistently run that fast for all of them, they deserve whatever placement they get.
Yeah,
But
had to.
9 times out of
Like,
10,
yeah, yeah,
that's not going to be the case. You're going to see them and they're going to get into ski first. Maybe they get out of ski first. They're going to get into, sled push first, and then they're going to start to go downhill because those first 2 runs are definitely a trap. I would even say runs 3 is also a trap. And then run 4 is where you actually can start to get, if you can run your fastest laps after burpee broads, then you're doing something right.
yeah, yeah.
And I think
Absolutely.
it comes
Maria?
down to, yeah, it comes down to actually like you talked to me a lot about this and like have really like emphasized this, and I've been, I think, way better at it now, is like the pace discipline piece, even in training. Building into effort versus like starting at this defined idea that you have in your head that I have to hit all my efforts at this. If you build into it, the same thing with a race, practice and training, like building into the efforts, you find that you become way more successful at executing and also way more confident. And so this is something like I've also started to instill in some of my athletes. Like, don't feel like you have to start at the fastest end of the range that we're targeting. And also, some of them just go by RP and they are way more successful versus feeling like this pressure to hit this particular pace. And I have found like I'll message you and be like, oh my God, I crushed that. This was the best day ever. Kind of thing versus before. And I'm like, I failed this workout so
Yep.
terribly. Multiple times I've told, like, there was a week there, a month where I was like failing every run workout and I was
Yep.
really discouraged. And then when, I stepped back and took a look and I was like, okay, what if we just like build, it takes the pressure off having a hit right away and then you build into it and then you just slowly increasing. And then, the next time I might start at that pace or just tad faster, but I'm still building into the effort. And I feel like that's how long-term sustainability and also confidence is built. I think, and this translates exactly to what you're saying in the race, right? Like build the effort over time. And you'll find that you execute well, you build confidence. You're like, oh my God, I'm not completely burnt after burpee broads. I can run. This is amazing. I'm the fittest person ever. And then you attack the back half versus being like, oh my God, I'm dying. I went way too fast. Now I'm just trying to survive and I'm not enjoying the race anymore.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that when we look at paces or zones, like which anybody coming from a triathlon background will think about it in zones, there is nothing physiologically different about going from like this part of zone one to this part of zone two, or this part of zone two to this part of zone three. And so if you go back to the RPE argument that we put forth, like, yes, I might prescribe to you that this workout's going to be tempo and then 5K pace or, a cut down or whatever, but that doesn't mean you have to hit exactly tempo pace for that workout to be successful. If the effort was correct in that first rep or that first part of the workout, and then you go and nail the rest of the workout, well, you nailed the workout, right? You like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, what is a workout for? It's to get the desired stimulus to help progress you as an athlete to get closer to your performance goals. And so time or pace is a relatively poor proxy for that. We just use it because we are control freaks as athletes who like to see something and then equate, because I did that, I can do that. And so when you let go of that, like if you ask anybody who's made it, I would say to like 35, 40, 45 as an athlete competing at a decent high level, you learn from them that they just kind of let go of it. They know their first rep is going to be garbage anyways because they're trying to warm up and get their friggin' legs underneath them. And then they still have great workouts. And I think a
Mhm.
lot of new athletes can learn that lesson from being around experienced people where, like, you run your first rep, you're like, I actually just don't care. I'm just literally trying to get this going. And then it's like, boom, I just nail it. Versus a lot of type A athletes or younger athletes be like, okay, if coach said tempo pace is 6:30 miles, like I better be 6:30 or 6:31 on that first one. It's like, nah, I actually don't care. I don't care. Go be 6:40.
Yeah.
It's totally fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think to that point, I think too, like when you're using RP, you do the first rep, like you said, could be garbage. You could be like, oh, that was kind of easy, or like that didn't feel too hard. And then I always look at it as like, okay, then the next one, I might increase pace just a little bit. How did that feel? Well, okay, actually, that still felt really good. Okay, where are we at? Where's my heart rate? How am I feeling? Like that kind of stuff. Like I kind of adjust as I go based on how I feel in the day, versus like we said, like this defined pace and it's a failure if I don't hit every rep at this pace. And I think that was a big learning curve for me, but like very, very valuable.
Yeah, it's way more fun to get your I fucking crushed this workout text than it is like, why is this not working? Yeah, exactly. Anything you guys want to add on the running side?
I
Um,
mean, I think the only other thing to kind of discuss here, maybe a little bit, and I want to actually get your thoughts on this because, I mean, at the end of the day, like RPE is got to be like the number one thing anyway. Whether you're running a 5K, a 10K, a HYROX marathon, you know, the number on the watch, you know, because HYROX is an indoor sport, we base things off of time from the in arch and around. And I know Maria and I, with our athletes, we talk a lot about like, okay, if this is the pace that you want to hit, then these are the times that you want to hit. And we have a calculator and all that stuff
Yeah.
for that. Do you think that like having that is a maybe not for your first or second race is a good thing, but like obviously for someone like Maria who's trying to hit times or go after like certain um, efforts, is it good to have that? I know because race to race it's going to be different as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So one of the things I would do, and it's a good question. So I remember, and I think Mike will, maybe Maria, I don't know if you're running this point, but like I remember having like a Timex slap watch and that being like the coolest tech ever, right? And so you would like slap your watch and it would show your split afterwards, or even an old Timex where you had to do it. And so the reason why I bring that up is like your GPS is useless in these like coliseums and amphitheaters and stuff that you guys race in. So what I would look at is on the first, this would be how I would put it. Let's see what you guys think. On the first lap, I would look to go, okay, I know this is roughly what I want my lap split to be. You guys calculate that, you give it to your athletes. I know you do, right? I would pick purposefully a split, whether it's a sign, a garbage can, the in, the out, whatever it is. And on your first lap, maybe not your first lap of the first one because you're all amped up and you've got a bazillion people around you. But once you kind of settle in, let's say it's lap 2 or lap 3, depending on the course, I would pick a split within that lap that you calibrate your RPE to. So let's say it's, around the first corner and there's a garbage can in the stands right there that you can see easily every time, right? Okay, I'm going to either split my watch or look at whatever the time is. I'm going to really dial in my RPE and ask the questions here, and I'm going to see what that is. I would argue for most of the races you guys do, it should probably be a third to a half of a lap, depending on what the actual course is, how long the laps are. I know they're standard in the same way that every Olympic triathlon is 10K. But anyways, you get some sort of standardized thing. And so you lock in an RPE calibration to a split time. And so you can now start to triangulate a little bit better your pacing that's not strictly reliant on the RPE that you have on that first lap coming out of a hard station or in the back half when your RP is going up because of the duration of the event. So you actually get two pieces of information that you can actually pull from a pacing perspective on the laps to have check-ins. What do you think?
I think that's super a great way to do it. It's just like when we were doing track originally, like when we didn't have GPS or anything, right? It's okay, well, I ran that 400 split in this time, or, my 200 split was this, so my 400 split is going to be on track or whatever it is. Or, I think that's a great way to do it. And then adding in the RPE part really can help later in the race as well.
Yeah, I think like I learned this when I was coaching at Queens. I would pace a lot of the athletes. And so I could pace almost any like race speed that they wanted. You could get it down to like within a quarter of a second per 200. Like I learned it when I was coaching at Queens, pacing athletes. So I had to jump in and be able to pace whatever it was. And so you had to have these benchmarks and RPE associated with different paces so you could understand it and go in and do it. And I think like you guys could do this even in, let's say some of your sims. Like I know we're all fans of only doing a few sims, but I would set up for athletes, whatever they're doing at their gym, or if they're jumping, I think it would be better to do it jumping outside to do it. I recognize that's not always possible at every gym, but I would set it up and go, okay, at that, sign on the corner or that, stop sign or whatever it is, right? I'm going to try and check that time on the first lap. And so if I get that, that's now my benchmark if I've calibrated with RPE to be able to look at all the rest of my laps. And if you guys are doing that in training, you're better able to do it on race day because you've practiced it a bunch. And you can use the GPS outside as a like kind of third party benchmark, but you're not going to have it indoors. And so I think that would be a very high level piece that you can add into training to get athletes to recognize that they can take the same tools they're practicing on race day that help with performance in all of their practice runs and then apply it on race day so they're comfortable with it.
Yeah, and I think like to that point, what people get wrong and or forget when training indoors versus outdoors is the fact that they can't rely on like their treadmill watch function, indoor watch function. We've talked about this a lot where people will be like, man, the treadmill said I was running this, but my watch said I was running this. And I'm like, well, if your treadmill's calibrated correctly, it's holding a certain pace and distance to like go by the treadmill, right? And so I think people try to use their indoor watch or have athletes say like, yeah, I had my GPS on in that race and like it was kind of working. I'm like, stop using it unless you're outside. We're not outside.
Yeah.
And even too, going from inside outside, again, satellites get interrupted by a multitude of things, right? So it's not always going to be perfect or accurate. So that's why I think, like, to your point, using a point in space or whatever, something ahead of you to then calibrate RPE, you can then perfectly translate that into your race and practice that. Because Mike and I always talk about how, like, training is like a dress rehearsal for the race. Like the sims and stuff that we do are like dress rehearsals to then practice transition, race specific work, etc. Practicing RPE. Like then you just literally copy and paste that into the race. And then it just makes it run so much smoother if you can master that. And I actually had one client who raced Houston without a watch. She went by RP, and two, maybe 1 second off every run was exactly
Wow.
the same pace. It was wild. So after that
Yeah.
race, I was like, never lose that ability because that is amazing. And a lot of people, myself included, can be a slave to the GPS to tell us what RPE is versus actually feeling it. And it was honestly amazing. She just like every race, I'm like refreshing and I'm like, holy shit. It's like almost the exact same pace, off by like literally a second every time she came
Yeah.
in, and I was like, "Oh my God, that is such a skill!" Like, please never
So
lose that.
it's so true. This is like the worst case scenario that could possibly happen. I had it happen to an athlete at Boston. So, 59-year-old trying to qualify for World Masters champs in the marathon goes to Boston. Their watch dies, like just shuts down less than a mile into the race. They run 59-year-old completely by feel and effort on Boston, right? Downhill, uphill, the craziness. Misses an even split by I think like 72 seconds, which is insane on that course without a watch to run 257 and change. Like he was also second wave. So the clocks are set up for the first wave, the elites. So he can't even calibrate his
Where
times
he's
off
at.
that. He had no clue. I
Wow.
I interviewed him because I thought it was amazing. Obviously, his performance was great, but that piece in particular. And so, for athletes listening, it's like you can develop that skill, like Maria's athlete or like my athlete. And I mean, I hope your watch doesn't fail on you, but if it does, you can go out and do something extraordinary because you understand your efforts and you're really listening to your body rather than listening to a watch.
Yeah, that's honestly even on a more impressive scale. Like that is
They're
really
both
cool.
super impressive, to be clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to transition a bit. And Maria, I want to get your take on this because I know you do a lot more work on this more so than Mike and I do. But nutrition and fueling for HYROX. And so there's, I find, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I see it's like this diet for adaptation or this diet for adaptation, or like you have to do this or fuel this much kind of thing. And so my perception is that there's a lot of misleading information out there. I think people are being sold to. But can you break down for us like no nonsense nutrition and fueling for athletes out there trying to chase their goals?
Yeah, and I think this is really important. I think to start the discussion is everybody's needs are different. And what works for one person might not work for you specifically. And I think it really depends on also like level of activity. That's a really important piece too. And then I think what's really important is fueling for performance if performance is like your main focus. I think that that can be really important. I think it also can be challenging, and I know I've experienced this too, is feeling like you need to have a particular body type or you need to look a particular way to do well in the sport or in a sport in general. And I think one of the most important things you have said to me, but also like I've had other people I've worked with as well, that your body will adapt to what it needs to look like based on what you're doing. So I think that's really important piece first and foremost, that no particular body is going to be, it's whatever your body is going to look like in whatever stimulus you give it, if you're feeling well and then also recovering. Well, I think is really important. And then the other thing I want to say too, like a lot of people get very inundated with like supplements and stuff like that. And I think like the biggest when we talk about levers, like levers of performance are yeah, hitting your race plans effectively, but then also sleep and nutrition are two really important ones in your control that you can adjust to perform well and adapt to training. And if those are off, no supplement that you take is going to help you get to that place. So I think that's really crucial. Like those are the foundational pieces. And then once you have that kind of nailed down, then, maybe we layer in some of like, when you talk about like the sprinkling and stuff at the top would be some of like the supplements that we're seeing online. But if you're sleeping 4 hours a night or 5 hours a night and you don't eat well, you predominantly undereat, nothing that you take is gonna help you. So I think from when we think about, maybe we'll start with like training nutrition. So like intra-workout nutrition, I think is super important for a lot of people. And a lot of that changes based on intensity of a workout, as well as duration of a workout. So a lot of the time, I think the rule of thumb is around 80 to 90 minutes of endurance work. You want to be including intra-workout fueling. So something like simple sugars and carbs are like, this is a great opportunity to take simple sugars would be like intra-workout. So anything like a tailwind that has, I think per scoop, it's usually around 25 to 30 grams of carbs in a scoop. You can get stuff now that has higher percentage of carbs. And you always want to look at fueling kind of per hour of activity kind of thing. And I think this is also something that needs to be trained. So like gut training is really important here. So I think an important piece, I usually get people to start on the lower end of intra-workout fueling and then kind of build and find what their sweet spot is. So if I have something that's might be a little more low intensity, I might only take like 40 grams an hour or 50 grams an hour based on what it is I'm doing. However, if I'm doing something high intensity, so like a high threshold session, conditioning workout, interval type work at the track, I might increase my intake more upwards of like 60 to 80 grams of carbs an hour. And I have to find like what my sweet spot is for training. So I think like that's an important piece too, is making sure like you a practice intra-workout fueling in training before then you take it into a race. I think that's really important. And b, making sure you find kind of like what that sweet spot is for you and you adjust kind of based on how you feel. So like, did you feel you had enough energy, you didn't bonk during the workout, you felt well after, like you don't need to go to the well for all these workouts. Like, did you feel like you could do another rep after? And a lot of that comes down to like pacing discipline, like we talked about, but then also making sure you're feeling with enough carbohydrates to fuel the workout as well. So I think those are indicators too. I think like also an important piece to know whether or not you're eating enough, just to support your training as well, is like how are you recovering. What we do in HYROX is predominantly like, yes, we fats and carbs are burned for fuel. Fats obviously at lower intensities, carbohydrates at higher intensities, like proportionally is higher. So I think it's really important to make sure that you are eating enough carbs as an athlete. If you are under eating, you'll notice things like, hormone health tends to decrease, sleep disturbances, if you're feeling hungry all the time, if you're bonking in workouts, if you feel like you can't perform, if you're feeling like you're not recovering, then that's another indicator of maybe increasing intake. So if you feel like, you wake up the next day after a hard workout and you feel wrecked, like there's been times where I've noticed like, back where I'd wake up and I feel like I got hit by a truck the next day. I'm like, whoa, like I feel like really terrible. To me, that's an indicator of, okay, how was my nutrition? I take a look historically, like what have I been eating over the last few days to lead up to that workout or whatever race it was, and then post as well. So I think those are indicators of underfilling, but every person is unique in terms of like quantity and how much they need. But what we do in HYROX, high intensity, so we're burning the rate at which we're burning glycogen in our workouts and in the race is super high. So that lends to the importance of making sure you're fueling adequately during training, during a race, and then enough for recovery. Um, so we'll get to, so training nutrition, important there. Protein timing around sessions is really important as well. So typically pre-workout, you want to see like moderate protein, higher carb. And again, it depends how far out from the session you're at or how far out you are from the session and or race. If you are like coming up close to a race or to a session and you only have like an hour and a half or maybe even an hour, then you're going to want something easily absorbable, digestible, etc. That doesn't, so minimal fats, minimal fiber, because that slows down digestion. And you want it something that'll absorb into your system ASAP, so then you can go out in an hour and run or do whatever activity you're doing. And then post-workout recovery is really important. So making sure you have adequate protein and carbs post-workout to then kickstart the recovery process. So I usually tell people can be within like an hour. It doesn't have to be like right away. having a scoop of protein powder and a carb source, whether that be like a banana or whatever that is, to then shuttle the protein to the worked muscles, super important. So making sure we have that post-workout recovery piece as well. And then within a couple hours, having like another more substantial meal. But I think making sure total calories for your training volume matches kind of what you're doing. And it's going to be different for people that train 16 hours a week and people that, that might train more like 8 hours a week. So it's such like a personal thing, and something you can use or tools you can use are starting to like track nutrition. So you can just bring awareness to what you're eating. There's been people I've worked with that didn't realize how little they were eating or how little carbs they were eating, and significantly underfueling, which then has this cascade effect across like our hormone health, sleep disturbance, all stuff like that. So that's a really important piece. So you can start to take some action in terms of like getting an understanding and awareness of what you're eating and how much you're eating, to see and then kind of gauge like, you can always track your weight too to see how, the impact of this nutrition has. If I've worked with athletes that will start to see a weight drop. So then I make sure that we are increasing nutrition because our goal isn't for them to lose weight. Our goal is for them to perform, and feel strong in their sport and what they're doing. So we always look for indicators like that. And I always look at sleep, energy, performance numbers, and stuff like that, before we make any adjustments. So it's always good to maybe start at a base caloric intake and then kind of look for those indicators in your training to see kind of like how you're doing. Um, During a HYROX race, high intensity, whether you're doing solo or doubles, I think it's really important to make sure you're fueling intra-race here. Some people might take one gel. I personally take two gels, and I usually keep it to something more liquid versus solid base. I find it very hard to chew at the same time as like having a high intensity training session. So in terms of taking chews and stuff like that, I usually err on the side of like a liquid gel to take. And if I think about my training, if I'm more upwards of that 60 to 80 grams of carbs an hour, then it makes sense that I'm taking two gels during a HYROX race where I'm going to be running for an hour. If I'm into doubles, hopefully less than an hour. Solo, kind of same idea, just over an hour. So you want to make sure that you are getting enough glycogen to like continue to fuel that race, because if ever you hit that bonking point in a race, it's kind of too late. So you always want to make sure you have a steady stream of glycogen available to you when you are racing. So great opportunities to take it, I would say, for me, are sled pull and row. Usually takes a bit of time for the carbs to absorb in your system and be available for energy and use. So then by that time, you still have that steady stream coming in, at the later stages of the race as well, by splitting up the intake of the gels. And obviously, when you're in a doubles race, it's a little bit easier, because you have those break periods. That scared me.
Sorry.
You have those break periods, to be able to stop and actually like ingest something while your partner's working. So I guess like an important piece to remember too is like big mistakes that we see, especially with I work with predominantly a lot of females and a couple of males here and there too, but I think the biggest thing people don't realize is how much they should be eating. And usually what we do is we kind of get a sense of where their maintenance calories would be. And a lot of the time, this depends on, like I said, current activity levels, what they do for work. Are they, sitting at a desk most of the day? Do they have a very active job? Because that all goes into, trying to understand where their maintenance intake is. And that's usually where I start with people, is try to find what their maintenance is, where they neither gain nor lose weight, especially for performance, because this is an important piece. And like we said, your body will adapt to however it's going to look based on the training that you're doing. So how can we best support that? And majority of the time, I see like a lot of females significantly under eating. And I think we also get into this tough space of, is leaner better, necessarily. And it's like, I think there's like a sweet spot for everybody's body type specifically. And if you feel like you have to force it to get there, then I don't think that's necessarily like the spot your body wants to be at. So there comes a little bit of acceptance with that too, I think. But one of the biggest mistakes I see is the underfueling component. And the way that we fix that is take a look at, I get people to show me what they've been eating over a few days. If one of our coaches is coaching them or if I'm coaching them, I can take a look at what their training volume looks like. I take into account their lifestyle factors, like things like their job. And then we assess, okay, where would be a good starting point? And then the other thing I think is really important that I do probably a little differently is if I feel like I want to get you to be with your caloric intake, I don't jump you. If the difference from where you're at to where I want you to be is, let's say it's 1,000 calories, I don't jump people to 1,000 calories right away of an increase. I like to build them up because I also feel like when you think about habit formation, I think going from A to B, if it's such a big gap, it's very hard to sustain. You want people to feel encouraged versus feeling like they're failing, trying to get their calories up. So I think like I do incremental increases till we get to this place of how's your training going? Are we at a stable place? I look at training volume and try to again assess where I think a maintenance piece would be. So I take a look at the impact on body weight and not for necessarily an aesthetic perspective, more from a performance, and take look at all their qualitative feedback as well in terms of how they're feeling. So I'd say that's a mistake I see. And then another mistake I see, or something I see a lot of, and again, I talk from more of like a woman's perspective that I've noticed, is like protein intake. I find a lot of women struggle with getting like their protein up, especially if there's any restriction around how they eat or what they eat. So, for example, if they're like, I don't eat any dairy or any gluten, for example, it limits kind of like what we can include for a protein source. Because a lot of the time, when you have a high protein number, you need supplemental protein. So, like whey protein, for example, you can get easy 25 to 30 grams in a scoop. But if people aren't using those sources, then you have to be a little more creative or figure out other ways that they can get what they need. So I think that's another mistake people make is not eating enough protein to support muscle recovery and performance as well. So I think those are probably the two biggest mistakes I see. And then probably also just like um, nutrition timing, I think, and then intra workout fuel. I think people miss the boat on intra workout fuel. Um, and I guess like to your point, Mike, people like are worried about taking in additional calories in training when they don't realize like if you take in those calories, the impact on your performance, like you'd rather have a better performance, right? Increase adaptations, etc. So if you can fuel well intra workout, it can work wonders for you in training and then also your recovery. You don't feel as like fatigued and like as depleted. And then it supports your recovery as well. So I'd say intra-workout fueling protein intake and then enough sufficient overall calories are probably some of the toughest or most challenges I see.
Yeah, I want to add something just from my clinical practice as a psychotherapist with eating disorders and athletes, and
Mhm.
you probably see this as well. Low iron in women in particular, and so when you've got low energy availability, like the clinical term now is RED-S, relative energy deficiency syndrome. Typically, what you'll see on the women's side of RED-S is a loss of menstrual cycle. And what we know, it's paradoxical, but when women lose their menstrual cycle, their iron stores actually drop as well too. So I don't know the exact hormonal pathway, but for women, having a normal stabilized menstrual cycle will actually help with having higher iron. And you might be asking, if you're relatively new to this, why would I want high iron? Iron is what binds oxygen to your hemoglobin and red blood cells. And so without it, you're not able to carry as much oxygen to the working muscles. And at the end of the day, this being an endurance performance sport, you actually need to have that oxygen and clear the carbon dioxide so you can perform better. And so, when I look at it from the psychological lens, I'm not saying I agree, but I can understand where women in particular will want to go to that aesthetic caloric cutting. To be clear, I don't think it's the most beneficial from a performance perspective, but I can understand some of the psychosocial models that get people there. But if you're looking at solving from a performance perspective, that low energy availability is always going to hamper your ability to recover, your ability to perform and train, and it's going to decrease your iron, which if you get low iron, you're going to be out for 6 to 12 weeks minimum with supplementation, if you agree with supplementation, to actually come back for your performance. So I didn't want to hijack, but I wanted to add that one in particular with your focus with women athletes as well, Maria.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece. And then also just like something you can do to obviously always check on your levels and stuff and where you're at is regular blood work. Um, I try to get into a habit of doing blood work every like 4 to 6 months, just to check on, how are my hormones doing? Like, where is my iron at? And just making sure there's nothing that's out of whack that needs to be addressed. or give me any inclination that, I might not be feeling enough, etc. So I think like that's another tool, depending on where you live, obviously, to be able to do regular blood work, checkups, I think can be also helpful.
Yeah. Mike, anything to
Um,
add on the nutrition? Sorry, Maria. Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
no. I think I'm good.
I mean, I think, yeah, Maria really nailed all of it down. The biggest things are like, it's one of the best tools for recovery at the end of the day, along with sleep. Like nutrition and sleep are probably the best things. And I heard someone said to me one time that like the gym isn't actually like gyms and workouts aren't actually like building what you want in your body. In fact, they're actually breaking down your muscle and they're eating away at your muscle, whether it's a gym workout or it's a run. You're breaking down the muscle. It's what you do afterwards for recovery that actually builds the body that you want. So if you're going into each workout and you're just breaking down muscle, but you're not replenishing, then that muscle is going to get depleted. Same thing with running. So if you're going in and you're going in under fueled, over caffeinated, like most people are, then you're just never like recovering. So like people are like, "Oh, that was a great workout. I'm so sore today." That's actually not the best thing. You actually don't want to be sore from workouts unless you're starting a new routine. That soreness should go away and you should get sore very little if your nutrition is right, your sleep is right. That all goes to tie into that. So I guess at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is nutrition is recovery for your body so that you can come out and perform the same or better days and weeks later. And I think like, somewhere where this is really true is like long distance staged running races. Like if you're out there running 12 hours a day for 5 days straight, you have to think about recovery while you're running. So like people that I work with that do these long staged races, it's more of what are you going to eat while you're running? You can run. Those people are mentally very, very strong usually. It's what are you eating so that you can come back the next day and perform again at the same level, and then come back the next day and perform again at the same level. Same as like the Tour de France. Those guys are eating immense amount of food because they're not actually just fueling what they're doing. They're fueling the recovery part of when they stop the race and when they pick up the next day.
And I fully agree. And I think that's a good piece to jump into how to actually structure a week. We've talked about nutrition and structuring it, thinking about, your performance. I think, Maria, you articulated extremely well the need for inter and intra. And so when we look at how to structure a week, I'm really keen on this session because I know, Mike, you just did some stuff on Instagram, I think it was, where you talked about how you actually look at building out a year. And I think this is really problematic in HYROX. I think I get it from a business perspective. They do these drops and it's out here and you get these tickets and you get in. And I get that from a business and marketing perspective, that scarcity type mindset. But from a coaching and performance perspective, can you guys break down how you actually think about progressing an athlete over seasons and years, not just singular events? Because I think that's a crucial piece for athletes to understand who typically go from like stock training plan or on their own and then just kind of repeat and hope it works out well versus what does actually good periodized HYROX training look like within the yearly training plan and the weird calendar that is HYROX and how it runs.
Yeah, I
You want
mean,
to start?
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that like it depends who you are as an athlete. If you are just getting into HYROX, you need to go and experience a HYROX race. So whatever you're doing, whether it's going to classes or doing your own training, you need to experience that race, and there should be no expectations for your first, second, maybe even third race. Those races should be more for fun. You should be doing it to just kind of like enjoy going out there and racing. As you go up into the sport, you need to start to prioritize races a little bit more. So the best way to do that, I find, is to have larger times when you're not racing so that you can actually train. Then you can taper down and maybe you do 2 or 3 races, which are like, within a month and a half of each other, but you're not going to gain any fitness between that first race and the third race, really. You might get faster on the third race because maybe the course is different layout, or you didn't have to weave in and out of so many people or whatever. But you're maintaining really between that time. And why I find this to be really helpful is because you basically have to taper down into a race, or at least deload going into a race. Then you have recovery time after the race. So if you're just every month deloading, recovering after the race, and then going right back into a deload and a recovery and doing that month after month, then you don't actually get any training. So you don't actually see like increases in terms of like, times getting better, or your race is feeling better, whatever that is. So you have to look at it on a higher level. So it's like, okay, well, let's just say, for instance, you're looking at someone that wants to qualify for Worlds. All right. Qualifying for Worlds, that means that Worlds should be that number 1A race. And you need 2 months before that to really get ready. If you do a race 2 weeks before Worlds, that's fine. But that needs to be part of like a training protocol then. So that would have to be what you're doing to maybe get ready for that big race. You're going into that probably a little bit more fatigued, and you can't call that an A race. You might not even taper for it. It might just be you're going in and just having whatever race outcome is there, but it's a supported training day more than anything. So then you have to think back like, okay, well then, months before that, I need to qualify. So maybe the beginning of the season, you've had a long layover from whatever your last race was, a long layover of like 2 to 3 months. That is where you're going to get the bulk of your actual like training done. Then you're going to taper down. You're going to have a race. Maybe that race went really well and you did well, or maybe it didn't go well. You need to think about like, okay, well, at this point, I didn't qualify. I need to qualify again. So I need to set up another, training block, work on the things that I didn't do well here so that I can do that again. But you can't do that with just like a month and a half of time. HYROX tries to, like you said, Brant, they try to make it like the scarcity thing where people are just like constantly racing, and you can basically race from year round at this point. Before, that's not how it was. It was like October was the beginning of the season, June was the end of the season, and that was it. So June is always when Worlds are. So you have to think about like, okay, if I want to qualify for Worlds, then I need to do some fall races. That gives me all summer after this past Worlds or whatever your last race was, get ready for those fall races. Then after that, I'm going to do some spring races, which gives you a good 2 to 3 months to really hone in on what techniques or what kind of training you need to do to get better, whether that's running or that is strength work or a combination or, real specific movements. Race there in the hopes that you qualify. And then you have one last build to get to, Worlds, which should be your number 1 race of the season. So if you're going out and you're racing every weekend, you're just not going to do what you need to do that. So you have to prioritize, okay, this first race is going to be my A race. Then I might have 2 weeks and I'm going to do another race. That race, may be another A race, or it might just end up being a B race for fun, doing it with a friend. And then you're taking a longer time, get that break where you're really focused on training. Then you race again, and then you take another longer time. And that's when you see those step ups in terms of like your racing actually gets better, because you might have a race in October or a race in September that you do really well at, and then you come back and you race in October and you don't do well. So then you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing well. I need to race again. So then you're just setting up another race and then another race. And you never actually get to train through. Instead, you're just training through all these races, and you race at like 85, 90% instead of racing at your potential of 100% based off of what your fitness is. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, I think if I can add or try to understand, I think one of the things that I see is there's almost no periodization to the way most people go about HYROX. And I think good coaches and athletes who are trying to reach their peak potential, let's call it, are the ones that recognize that progress comes from training, not racing. And I think where this gets muddied is elites. We all strive to be elites. I talked about competitive pressure. We want to do what they do because we believe it's going to help us get better. But elites, like especially at the super elite, like an hour for them doing a HYROX isn't all that crazy, and they can recover in 2 or 3 days. And a lot of them don't even taper down for these, and so it becomes a sim day to them. Now, the other piece is they have sponsors, they have negotiations that they have all the things that come from being a high athlete, which changes the decision making framework. I think from age groups changes the decision making matrix in terms of how often you should perform when you compare it to age groupers and borderline elites or beginners. And so how do you guys, and maybe Maria, I'll ask you this one, how do you guys lay out like a sessional season type plan when you're looking at the weird nature, and maybe it's not too weird because marathoning is kind of like this as well too, because you got to get into the event. But if you get a new athlete and they're looking to qualify, but they've got to get into certain races, and depending on if they got in or if it's sold out already, what do you guys put forth as a seasonal type plan for the progression of an athlete across, let's say, a calendar year? I know that's not how HYROX runs, but just as an example.
Yeah, I think, what I typically like to do is kind of like zoom out. So if we are to look at like the potential race calendar of the year, what does that look like? What races are people interested in doing? So a particular athlete, a lot of people race in like fall and spring kind of thing. So depending on where we're at, what is going to be like their A race for the season. And some people, like we mentioned before, aren't necessarily going to go to Worlds, right? Like they're not at that place yet. So then if we have to pick kind of like an A race for, let's say, the fall and then for like the spring season, we kind of pinpoint that. And then I typically will work backwards from that point in time, depending when they come to me. And again, this is all based on kind of like their background as well, but everybody can benefit from just base strength and aerobic work. So usually when I'm starting a training block, if we're far enough out, because sometimes you have people that come to you and like, hey, I want to race in 8 weeks, and you don't really have much to work with, but they are going to be a longer term client. You kind of have to work with where they're at. But if you could purposely plan out a training block, I typically like to do it in chunks. There's always like after someone does their final A race, we take a little bit of time off and then we'll go into more of like back to the basics kind of training block is what I like to call it. Getting back into more strength training. So increase the number of strength sessions, again, depending on background as well as time, availability, what else they got going on, lifestyle, access to equipment, and then base running and base miles and base biking and some erg work, but all easy work again, just to like give them a bit of a break and build up more of like that aerobic base. And then as we move closer and closer to the race, then we start to, drop off a strength session, add in more running workouts, add in more HYROX specific work, the closer that we do get to the particular A race in itself. But again, you start to see like, this underlying base training phase where we're really focused on building strength and building a solid aerobic base. So like low intensity, higher volume work, if they can sustain it with some, upper end like run efficiency. So doing some like, let's say pickup strides, etc. And then you start to build into more of like a build phase or like specific race specific phase where we start to drop into more um, you know, conditioning work that's a little more HYROX specific, increasing run workouts to maybe, like you said, like 2 a week, um, and start to also build like some of the longer run durations out as well, or bike duration, progress erg work. And then as we even get like 4 to 6 weeks out, we get like really more like kind of into more dress rehearsal type stuff. So like more HYROX specific run to station work, practicing different techniques, really honing in on what that race pace is going to look like, and continue to build that out. And then we get into, usually I taper people about like a week out from the race where we'll keep some intensity, reduce volume quite a bit. And then some people also race multiple in one weekend, so that also takes into account kind of what their training will look like building up as well. So if you have back-to-back race days, can they handle back-to-back race intensity days? So do we simulate that in kind of like the race build up? Um, and then we do the taper. I like to taper people about anywhere from 7 to 10 days, depending on the person. If they do well with better recovery, with more recovery, sorry, or if they do well with a little more intensity, um, closer to race. I don't know if you want to add anything, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's you work backwards from your main focused race and you are very defocused in terms of like what you're doing further away. You're working more on those basics and the strength, more maximal strength. As you get closer, that focus gets closer and closer to what the race actually entails, and you start to add that stuff in.
Yeah. One thing I want to ask you guys, because I do this in on pure run coach training, and I've done it a little bit with both of you, but I like to experiment with new or different stimuli in less important blocks or ahead of less important races to see how athletes tolerate the novelty of a new stimulus before applying it towards like an A race. And so how would you guys go about, you're nodding for anybody listening, you're nodding, so I assume you do this, but how do you guys do that on the strength and sim side for athletes when you're trying to close gaps in, let's say, a non-important race or a B race or a C race, that you then want to apply that training potentially towards an A race later that year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is super valid. I do some of that with a lot of my like seasoned athletes, where their feedback is maybe a little bit more understood, like in terms of what they're doing, and they can kind of handle like big changes quickly. So I will do some of that with them and see how they handle it. But it's usually like they know and they have understandings going into some of these races that this race is either a B or a C race. And I'm just doing it to go because my wife's going to be there. And why wouldn't I race while I'm, somewhere? Um, or they've already qualified and they have another race coming up and I'm like, okay, well, let's just hammer, you know, one station and really work on like one specific part, leading up to this race and see how it affects your actual race. um, so I'll do it in that regard, but it's not something that I do a lot with like beginners who truly just need that basic work. And you know a lot of beginners too, they're going to classes. So I don't know what they're doing at these classes that they would be doing. If they want to do a class and we're coaching them, we say that's totally fine. It obviously takes away from what we're trying to accomplish, but we can still kind of work that in, knowing some of how that works for them. Um, but for them, it really needs to just be the basics over and over and over again. Whereas someone that's a little bit more seasoned, I probably will experiment a little bit more with what we're doing or push them in different directions depending on, what the race is and where it's coming.
Maria, what about you? What are you experiencing either with your own training, what we're doing, or what you're doing with athletes in terms of this kind of experimentation?
Yeah, I think, I've talked this entire time mostly from like the coach perspective. So I think maybe talking about this one from like the athlete perspective, being coached by both of you and kind of like what my experience has been. I think like, on the strength side, Mike has tried a few different things with me that then he might pare down for some other athletes of his own. And, it might be like higher volume sets. It might be like, less reps, less rest, sorry, in between particular strength sets, etc. And I will give him feedback saying like, hey, like this was too easy, or hey, this, I've been like sore for like 4 days from this particular workout, or I feel like this wasn't really working. And I know having both of you and having those meetings where I feel like I can tell you guys what I think's working and not working from not only mostly from like a recovery perspective, and having the coach that's like open to hearing the feedback, I think is really important. And then being able to tailor it. I think like not only do you as an athlete need to be coachable, but then I think also giving proper feedback and your coach taking that and understanding like what adjustments to make. Because I know the three of us have had those conversations where I've said like I feel like I'm not recovering or I feel like I'm not performing, you know, Grant, when we have an intense run workout Friday, I feel like I can't perform on Saturday because like my legs are too fatigued and I'm just not at that point that I can do both of those back to back yet. And then we adjust. So I think like when you do have athletes that are more seasoned, you can experiment and then you can kind of have that, then you can figure out what works for them and then kind of apply it sometimes at different levels for other athletes and get their feedback and see what works. So I think like that's one of the cool things about coaching is like you can experiment and see like different things, what works, what doesn't work, what has helped this athlete grow in these particular areas. And I think like being able to adjust things with their feedback, especially when they're more seasoned, um, I think really just helps create that really like personalized plan that really works for them. So I can say from my experience working with both of you, I've said like, hey, this isn't working, or hey, I feel like I'm not performing, or like, hey, I'm not hitting these times. Like, what do we need to adjust, or what do I feel like I'm doing wrong in particular? So I'd say from like the athlete perspective, like I've definitely experienced that on like the run side with you, but then also like the strength side with Mike, where I'll just tell him honestly, like this time domain was like too tight. Like there's no way I could have finished this particular workout in this particular time frame, or those volume sets were like way too much and I was sore for like 6 days. I just feel like it was like not necessarily unrealistic, but like not an achievable workout for me at this point, kind of thing.
And sometimes I think we need that feedback as well. And that's where like one-on-one coaching is different than like a group online plan because like sometimes you're trying to push someone. So like for instance for Maria, like using a sled workout. So for instance, yesterday we had a sled workout and it was every minute on the minute she had to push X number of meters of the sled. And she's like, this was really easy. And part of it was that I wanted it to be easy because I wanted her to push unbroken as fast as she could so that she could get used to that feeling and then just have the rest of the minute. So it was like high intensity for like 20 seconds. And then it was basically 40 seconds of total rest. And it was a not super high volume, but it was high enough volume. Um, but now that we know, okay, 20 seconds, this is how far she got, and then the last couple, I was like, well, all right, let's try to go twice that distance. And she's like, I wouldn't have been able to finish this workout with twice the distance. So then we know, okay, well, depending on how much weight's on the sled, what the stimulus of the workout is, which Brand, I know, that's something that you take and think about a lot with your running is like, what's the actual stimulus of the workout? So for that workout, it was, I want you to push as fast as possible. Yeah, if you have 40 seconds of rest, great. I don't care. You're pushing pro women's weight and you got that distance in, 20 seconds. That's outstanding. If you could do that in a race, then you would be like 90 seconds for your sled push, that kind of thing. So when you start like breaking down things like that, then it shows them and it builds confidence. But on the other side, sometimes you try to push them really hard so that they come back. And I might be like, all right, I want you to do your burpee broad jumps in 3 minutes, for instance. And this is something I had the other week. It was, I want you to do 80 meters of burpee broads in 3 minutes. And I had a minute before of rest and a minute after of rest before going into something else. And I wasn't anywhere close to hitting 3 minutes. I was like 350 for my burpee broad jumps. But you write down the comment and you leave that with your coach to deal with. That's not something that you need to like internalize and be like, oh my gosh, I'm a piece of shit because I couldn't do my burpee broads in this time. Like, that's not for you to worry about. That's why you have a coach too, is so that they, number one, push you, but then understand where you're at based off of how they pushed you so that you can come back and adjust, or they can come back and adjust for you.
Yeah, the way I would sum it, I like making short, pithy little statements kind of thing, but I look at it as capacity exploration. And right, so some of these workouts, it's like I might actually not know. Like, can Maria handle? Like, I try to have a good idea, right? But it's like, okay, where is it in terms of the context of this? And so then I like those type of things as much as you guys sometimes don't like them on your end of it. It's great on my end of it, but on your end of it, it's like, okay, how is this fitting in with the global stimulus we're doing in this block in this session? And what does that tell us about asking, like when I put my coach hat on, what does that tell me about the questions I need to ask about recoverability, pacing, nutrition, etc.? Cross off any of those that like you guys are crushing, and then go, okay, now I look at it and go, okay, we explored some capacity here. We're not quite there yet. Is that a coaching problem, or is it a physiology problem, let's say, on the athlete, right? And both of those things can be true at once, to be clear. But I think from both of us, like as the athlete and the coach, it gives a really cool indication of where we're at, because sometimes you might come back to that session and see it on the kind of be like, oh man, last time like that went down, right? But now you see it and you're like, I actually got better at that. And so that's why I like that experimenting kind of with that like B race or C race, because even if it's like a failure, it's like, okay, well, that's now a capacity piece we need to close going into the A race, right? And so like when I look at this with runners, if you look at somebody like my wife, Elena, before she ran 246, or sorry, after she ran 246, when we were trying to come back and run low 240s, high 230s, we actually skipped the marathon for like 10 months almost and went back to speed stuff, because her capacity issue wasn't, can I go run 120 miles a week for a year straight? It was, can I run 35 minutes in the 10K, right? And so I can tell you, she hated almost every single one of those 10K workouts. But then when she went back to that build, and there was a couple she failed, when she went back to that build for Berlin, which ultimately ended up being super hot, so she didn't get the performance she wanted, but when she went back to it, she was way more confident in some of the harder sessions and able to better tackle it. And so I think that is what I would call the art of coaching that goes along with the science of periodization, that I think when you have really great coach athlete relationships, or like the dynamic we have across the three of us here, you can come back and be like, no, scrap that. Like, that's trash. I can't do that. It's not working. It's not fitting the puzzle piece. It's like, okay, got it. Now we got to mix that and come back over here. And so the reason why I asked that question is I think a lot of athletes either don't have that relationship with coaches, or they're doing programs that don't allow for any of that individualization. And I wanted to highlight that that's what coaching actually is, because I know that's what I'm like. That's what you guys are like with your athletes, because I see it in the way we interact. And I would encourage athletes to find coaches and environments that are willing to do that and exploration and understand your capacity. Because if you as an athlete are giving a coach like your dream, your goal, right? That's what you need to actually get after that like relentless pursuit of excellence. And so hopefully that's helpful for athletes. And that ends my rant on coaching.
Yeah, and I just want to say that I love that capacity exploration thing. This doesn't have to be a part of what
Yeah.
our video or whatever. But I think like the important part too is to your point, like I've programmed something for somebody. I'm like, ugh, this is hard. I don't know if they'll be able to, do this particular workout. And they didn't. They failed it. And like that is fine. But it's again knowing where somebody's at and kind of testing it. And then you pull back and then the next time I programmed it, she crushed it and then confidence shot up. Or, if I give somebody a wall ball EMOM, I'm thinking of someone specifically the other day, I put a target and she's like, I can't hit that. I only hit this. Great. Now I know what your target is. And next time we'll keep building capacity in that way. But I think as a coach too, our job is to also push people to explore what that capacity is and not keep playing it safe. Like, oh, I know this person can do 10 reps every minute on the minute, so I'm willing to give them 10. Fuck that. No, you're going to try for 14. If you fail, that's okay. But like, tell me where you're at so we continue to build. And I think as coaches, our job is to force people to also explore their capacity too.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, why would you not want to fail in training versus failing in a race? Like, you might as well try the stuff in training and make sure, okay, well, that didn't go well. I can't run at a 355 per kilometer pace right now for, 10K. And that's okay, because it's a training thing. Even though I was nervous going in, fine, whatever. Versus getting to a race, running 355, and then all of a sudden you're running 5-minute kilometers because you didn't realize you couldn't do it,
Yeah. It reminds me of this idea, and I think I might have said this to you, Maria, when I first started working with you. I will be your biggest cheerleader, but I also have to be your harshest critic. And that is the job of a coach, because if you are only giving like softball workouts, the currency of a good workout is devalued, right? You have to sometimes have those hard workouts in the same way that I also have to sometimes have hard conversations with athletes. Because if I'm only the cheerleader, that currency gets devalued and inevitably you don't get the proper information channeled across, or the proper stimulus, or the proper gap analysis of what the athlete is lacking. And so it's a fun game. That's why you coach people, not spreadsheets, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is probably a great place for us to kind of close out. We're 240 in. I mean, I've loved this entire conversation. I know there's a couple things we wanted to add in when we were kind of planning for this. So I would encourage anybody, if you have questions or there's something you think we missed. I know we did this primarily on a individual, not a doubles, not a pro type level or elite 15. And so leave questions about it. Anything you want us to answer. Like, I think we're all game to come back and do a second, a third video on this, but we really, and I'll let you guys sum here as well too, but we really wanted this to be an all-encompassing, go-to informative piece for anybody thinking about HYROX, thinking about training, thinking about taking it to the next level. I didn't want this to be a do this workout and get this time or finish this type thing, but more so the theoretical spectrum of what HYROX actually is as a sport and how to excel at it. So I hope we accomplished that. Mike and Maria, what do you guys think?
Yeah, for me, I would say I think the important takeaway here, and I think the cool perspective that we did bring is like Mike and I are very seasoned in the HYROX space. I consider us experts in that area, and then you're an expert in running, and then marrying those two. I don't think has necessarily been done before in kind of one of these types of dialogues. So I think like that's super valuable. And every time I talk to you, Brant, I learn something new that then I can apply to myself and like my athletes as well. And I think always seeking out more information from other coaches and continuing to learn is also what makes a good coach. So that's why I've like loved our relationship so much, because you've always been so open. If I'm like, hey, I got this question, like, what do you think about this? Or like, hey, I have this athlete and this is what we want to accomplish. This is my thought on that. What's your take on it? And I appreciate your perspective. So I love kind of like the integration of us three, because I think together we make like a really great panel on all things like running, HYROX, etc. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, if you take anything away from like this conversation, is number one, you have to be smart about how you're putting your training together. But number two, you have to be even smarter about how you are recovering and making sure you're like hitting those pillars of recovery, because you can work out as hard as you want, but if you're not recovering just as hard, then the work isn't going to actually shine through. And it's got to be very smart work. You can see people doing hundreds of hours of training or running hundreds of miles a week or whatever, but that doesn't mean that is exactly what you need based off of your physiology or your lifestyle even.
Yeah, no, it's spot on. I think I would say train for where you're at and train to close your gaps, not what someone else is doing. And I think too many people get stuck in that trap of so and so did this or they did this or so and so posted this workout. It's like, yeah, they're also trying to sell you their training plan kind of thing. And so it's more so about what do you need to get better. And I like that all three of us take this very individualistic approach to the training that's required to move to the next level. And so I appreciate both of you joining me on this channel. I mean, obviously we'll get stuff so you guys can put it out on your channels as well too. We'll link your Instagram, because I know you guys are really, really great on there. It's a great follow for learning and understanding and celebrating the athletes in HYROX. And so any parting thoughts or anything you want to add or make sure that people out there know?
I think for me, would just be to make sure that they're enjoying training, kind of staying true to their capability, and then really just taking the lens of, and I know this has been helpful for me, is like, how good can I get? And just like make sure you enjoy the process, because no outcome is worth it if you hate what you're doing.
Beautiful. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think enjoying the process and truly just, exploring what your limits are is really important. So always kind of exploring.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Thanks both of you. I'm sure we'll pick up for round two.
Sounds good.